What do we have to do, the 30th, right? Good evening. Welcome to the August 30th Village Board Special Session and Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, we'll just take a moment to pause and reflect on the tragedy of all that's happening to our fellow Americans and all of those in the Houston area. Mr. Kahan.
Thank you, Mayor. Trustee Levin.
Here.
Trustee Quezada.
Present.
Trustee Codman.
Present.
Trustee Bazemore.
Present.
And Mayor Garrity.
Present.
Do we have any administrative reports? Excuse me, do we have any announcements before we get to administrative reports?
I will just announce the somewhat obvious news that we have this evening. Oh, no. Deputy Mayor Codman's going to be very quiet tonight.
I didn't know it was that easy. All we have to do is unplug it.
All right, Tom's here to help. All right.
I get skills, it's all right.
Okay. I would like to officially welcome Debbie McDonald to the seat, to the table. She is joining us for the first time as our village manager, although it's 2 days before her actual start date, but she just was eager to get started, and we're very happy to have her here. So, Debbie, do you want to give you kind of introduced yourself 2 weeks ago, but this would be a chance if you'd like to say anything to the community? I didn't warn her.
I am very excited to be here. I am looking forward to meeting the different members of the community and working with what I hear is just an amazing staff, and I'm very excited. I do have 20 years of experience in municipal government management, and I really believe in working together collaboratively and cooperatively and having a shared vision and just making life fun. I think that work should be fun, so we'll figure out how to make that happen for everybody, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much, all of you, for choosing me to be here.
We are very excited to have you on board. And if you would like to meet Debbie in person, shake her hand, say welcome to the community. My name is Jan Smith, and I do great things in the community, and you should know about it. Whatever it is you want to come and say to Debbie, she's going to be at least 2 places that you can predict in the next couple of weeks. Next Friday, September 8th, from 12 until 2 p.m. at First Village Coffee. That's 123 Main Street, First Village, on September 8th at 12 noon until 2 p.m. And then a week later on Saturday, the 16th, she'll be at the Farmers Market for most of the market, starting at 8:30 in the morning, and she'll stick around until noon. So those are some really good opportunities to just come by and introduce yourself and welcome Debbie and get to learn a little bit more about her. So thank you, Debbie. We're delighted to have you here. I believe there are a couple of other announcements folks have.
I'm going to start. Want to encourage everyone to come out and enjoy the festivities for the Friends of Richard Wishney Park at Richard Wishney Park, September 14th, 6 to 9. It's a fundraiser. It will also highlight some local talent. There'll be music, lots of food and beer tastings and wine tastings, and it's all included in the cover chart, so please come out and support the park and the village.
Rika, it's an unusual foundation. I believe it's our only park that has a foundation
Right.
that does the fundraising for this, and it's also a fairly new initiative. Would you mind just giving folks a thumbnail explanation of what is Friends of Richard Wishney Park if they're not familiar with park conservancies or anything of this nature?
I should also say, just for sake of transparency, that I'm also on the board of the Friends of Richard Wishney Park. So, and Richard will actually be there. People are always surprised that there's actually a Richard Wishney, but he'll actually be there. The Friends help fund different programs and some expenditures that might not be usual for the village that helps flowers, just enlarged the path. A lot of it is done by the village, but it's really one of those successful private-public. I actually don't know how long it's been around. I think it's been about 3 or 4 years that the Friends of, and
Oh,
it has a
even
board
before.
as a not-for-profit, yeah.
Not-for-profit was set up. Yeah.
Right. So you can donate it, you can become a friend of it. It's a nice public, private. I don't know if you want more than that, but it's a pretty straightforward, a few people who got together and really, it's a highly used park. It's there for people to work out and walk. And there's some really interesting dynamics that go on with that water, because there's a lot of fish that gets put in there. We want to increase it to become more of an education system, that we have some volunteers to do work there. So it's pretty neat. And people will learn more about it that night.
Wonderful, and that's the 14th, correct?
September 14th.
Mr. Quesada, did you have an announcement?
Yes, I was just mentioning to you, but thank you. It's actually it's something that we do, our community does in celebration of memory of September 11. We do that on the waterfront. Our fire department will be there, our police department will be there, EMS, the town and the village, and we're inviting to all the community to be part of that. It's September 11, the waterfront. And it starts at 6 o'clock.
And any firefighters or police chiefs in the room confirm the start time for the 9/11 ceremony?
That would be you.
Oh, is it
7 o'clock? 7 p.m. start time? Okay, it is
All right,
now.
So 7
Excellent.
p.m. All right. So we invite the community to be part of the celebration of memory of September 11th. So
It's a beautiful.
it is. It's
It is a beautiful
beautiful
ceremony.
tribute to what has happened to our country itself. So.
Deputy Mayor Codman, did you have an announcement?
Sure. Want to remind everybody about September 9th from 9 to noon, the Ossining Historic Cemeteries Conservancy will be doing a gravestone cleaning and restoration workshop. We'll be at the Dale Cemetery again. And I was there a few weeks ago, and there's no end to the stories that are told from these gravestones, and encourage you to come and join us. If you get to Dale Cemetery, just follow the yellow signs to the location. Just bring yourselves. We have all the tools and everything you need. And again, that's at the Historic Dale Cemetery, September 9th, 9 a.m. to noon. It's good for community service if you're looking for community service hours. If you're a high school student, this is one of the ways you can achieve that, and you can help restore some of the beautiful gravestones in our historic cemetery. So that's September 9th, 9 to noon, Dale Cemetery. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think I go back to you now, right, Mr. Khan, because you are acting as our clerk for this special session?
I am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I need to get another nameplate.
Yes.
But briefly, with regard to administrative reports,
Oh,
there are a few resolutions that we have this evening. There's a finance resolution, which we discussed last week in executive session. There's an appointment to our Board of Ethics. And there's also a resolution which was actually approved last week, but due to a mistake by Corporation Counsel, my other hat, the incorrect resolution was actually sent to the clerk. So we're going to reread this resolution, and I will send the correct one through. And then we have a fairly busy work session schedule, which we'll get to once we get through the special session here. Okay. Are there visitor recognition with regard to any village board resolutions? Is there anyone who wishes to speak on any village board resolution at this time? Not hearing anyone, we'll go to our first resolution. Resolution A, whereas the village wishes to amend the 2017 capital plan to reallocate excess available bond proceeds for a similar and allowable purpose as defined under provisions of subdivision 28 of paragraph A of section 11.00 of the local finance law for purchase of machinery and apparatus for construction and maintenance. Now therefore be it resolved the following capital project budgets are modified and established as appropriate to provide funding and appropriations for the purchase of 2 dump trucks under New York State contract by the Department of Public Works. Increased capital project fund appropriations, total increase $118,587.10. Decreased capital project fund appropriations, total decrease to appropriations, $118,587.10. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board? Yes, sir.
So I want to point out that the reason that we have this extra money, and as it was indicated in the beginning, is because we were able to get very favorable pricing on other equipment. And that left a residual and is making it possible for us to buy additional equipment. So it's a good thing.
Right. And this is equipment that was anticipated for
Yeah.
the coming year, and so
Yeah.
it makes
So
sense to
we're gonna
take
be-
advantage of these
Yeah,
pricing
so
now
we-
while we have the
Right, so
funding.
we're going to be able to do it in this year instead of putting it in next year's budget, so
Yes.
just saying.
Thank you for that, sir. Mr. Clerk?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next, resolve the 2017 general water and sewer funds budgets are modified to transfer available unexpected appropriations to allow for the purchase of a replacement vehicle for the Department of Public Works as follows. Total increase in appropriations, $32,311.25. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board? Mr. Kahan?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next resolution. Whereas pursuant to Section 17-5A of the Village of Ossining Code, the Board of Trustees shall appoint members of the village's Board of Ethics. Now be it resolved that upon due deliberation, the Board of Trustees appoints Jamie Cotel to be a member of the village's Board of Ethics for a term of 3 years from the date of her appointment. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
On the board. Well, I will just comment, I want to thank Ms. Cotel for applying for this position. Trustee Quesada and I had an opportunity to interview her recently and really enjoyed getting to learn about her personally, her connections in the community, and particularly some of her experience that will lend itself well to the Board of Ethics. We're really delighted to have her joining this group, and there is a vacancy that we're eager to get filled, which is why we were very pleased to be able to put it on tonight's agenda so that she can go ahead and join her about-to-be new colleagues on the Board of Ethics. Thank you very much, Jamie.
All in
Mr.
favor?
Kahan?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, resolve that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, pursuant to New York Private Housing Finance Law, Section 123, subsection 4, consents to the voluntary dissolution of Maple House Associates, L.P., the current owner of the property located at 15 Maple Place, Ossining, New York, Section Block Lot 89.19-4-53, as a redevelopment company subject to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, and upon such voluntary dissolution, Maple House Associates LP shall continue to exist as a limited partnership not subject to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, and shall have no obligations thereunder, including but not limited to payment of any surplus from the sale of the property or from the funds in the treasury of Maple House Associates LP. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, pursuant to New York Private Housing Finance Law, Section 125, approves the termination of the partial exemption for the above-described property, which termination shall become effective 1 day preceding the conveyance of the property from Maple House Associates LP to Maple House Renewal LLC. And be it further resolved that if the conveyance of the property from Maple House Associates LP to Maple House Renewal LLC does not occur either 1, within 1 day following the termination of the exemption, or 2, on the same day as the voluntary dissolution of Maple House Associates LP as a redevelopment company, subject to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, then the consent and approval by the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, recited above, shall be null and void, and both the exemption and the obligations of Maple House Associates LP to remain a redevelopment company pursuant to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law shall be reinstated as though such exemption and obligations had never been interrupted. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board, please, Deputy Mayor Copman.
Mr. Kahan, can you explain the nuance here between what we passed last week and this week?
Actually, Trustee Cobman, this is identical to what you passed last week. What happened was, I received an email from the attorneys in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to stress Washington, D.C., because what they told me was that I included a comma after the names of one of the companies, and that the company's name did not have a comma, so we needed to change it. So what then occurred was that we, when I did make the change, I made it in the original version of the resolution, not this resolution. And I sent the original version to the clerk. That's what actually got put into as a resolution, even though this was what was read last week. So to avoid any confusion, we're just redoing it, and we will then have this done. But that was my bad, as my daughter would say. So that's exactly what it is. It's identical to last week's.
With missing a comma. Oh,
We've taken the comma
oh,
out now.
yes, okay.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for making sure we all were.
I
understood,
just
because
wanted,
didn't
I was listening to it, and I'm looking it over, I'm saying, I've been here before. I thought it was
You most
Groundhog
certainly
Day or
have.
something. So, but thanks for the clarification. I missed the comma, so I'm glad you did found it, so.
As did I. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Still.
Opposed? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board on any other issue? Having heard no one else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn to work session.
Oh, just
Would
one
you? I
brief
apologize.
question. I have, there was an email circulated regarding modification for the employment agreement. Did we need to take care of that tonight?
We
That's
can
it.
have it actually here to just sign. It doesn't.
It just needs to be
require-
signed. Excellent. Okay.
So,
Moving on then.
okay.
Yes, entertain a motion to go into work session.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. With that, for the very first time, we get to say, Madam Manager,
Oh, that's right. Wow.
take us away.
What?
Wow, okay.
Typically, you would then say,
I'm not
sure.
prepped for this.
Okay, then our first item on the agenda is related to small claims assessment reduction filings, and I think we will be inviting up Ms. Treasurer Tom Warren to walk us through this.
So this is usually my spot.
Sort of, but don't worry about it, because
Okay, good.
it doesn't have to be. It's just keeping us on task.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Board of Trustees, and
Good evening,
welcome,
Tom.
Betty. Generally, because of the way the assessment calendar works, I only appear before the board in March in order to bring all of the SCARs, the small claims assessment reductions that need approval for refund. And this year, when I presented the list, I did advise that we were told that there was going to be a slight delay on some of them and that we would be back later in the year. So here we are with just the following two straggler SCAR exemption or reductions that need board approval to allow me to refund the $512.08 assessment reductions for the two parcels. The past couple of years, we've seen a drop in the amount of the SCAR refunds. So we had budgeted $50,000 because that had been a good number for a number of years. This year, the amount that had been approved previously by the village board was $11,322, and now there's another $512. So we're well below the amount that had been estimated in the budget for the SCAR reductions. But as I said, I do need a board resolution authorizing me to make the refunds to the two property owners. And that'll be next week.
Any questions or
or-
concerns on this? Thumbs up, put it on the agenda?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Tom, for
Thank you
your
very much.
thoroughness. We look forward to voting on that next week. And next up, I think, Mr. Kahan, can you provide us with a brief understanding of what we should anticipate next week regarding the
Yes.
contract for the replacement of the water mains?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is with regard to the Gordon Avenue and River Avenue project. The low bidder was Jokin Development Corporation of White Plains. Their bid was $989,947.50. Just so the board is aware, the consultant, Charles Manganaro Consulting Engineers, their probable cost for construction was $1,182,075. Jokin Development was at the low end. The high end of all bids was $1,517,750. Jokin Development has done numerous projects both in Connecticut and in Westchester County with regard to sewer main repair and sewer work and water main work. So they were recommended that the bid be accepted by Charles Manganaro, and the plan would be to submit a resolution to the board next week awarding the contract to Jokin Development Corp.
And that's just for, that's for both the Gordon Avenue and River Parkway, but this is just for this year's projects or this year and next year?
This is for, I believe this is, I will double check that, hang on just one sec. This is the replacement of water mains Gordon Avenue and River Parkway, so this is not the,
So the Stormy-Town Road stuff for next year
That's correct.
is going to be a separate awarding.
that
of
is
it.
correct.
Okay. Thank you. Looking forward to voting on that next week.
Okay, thank you.
So next up, we will talk about some parking issues at what we know so colloquially as municipal lot number 2, which is the State Street parking lot. And I see that we have with us a number, all of our fire chiefs, the whole team is here. Very good. Thank you for joining us. And I know that Corporation Counsel Kahan, you have had a number of conversations. Should we invite the chiefs to come
Yeah, I
and join
think
us?
Chiefs could come up and,
Yeah.
and Chief Sylvester, I know if he wanted to as well, sure.
Yes, please, Chief Sylvester. Well, there's so many of you.
You have a
Some
lot
of
of
you can
seats?
sit at the
Bring some seats up.
table, some of you,
Okay. Okay.
all right.
It's all yours, Angelo.
We can share? Thank you. Good evening, Board, Madam Mayor.
Evening, Chief.
So the issue we come here tonight for is the lot on State Street at headquarters. In my 4 years as chief, just watching the parking lot progress through the years, it's just that it's becoming overwhelming as far as who's allowed to park in there and the cars that are being parked in there. So looking back, we have 2 companies that presently are there along with our headquarters. So we're just, at certain times we pull in there, we only have about 2 spots just for our members. So, and that's what brought up this conversation, that if we can make a head on it. And I spoke with Stuart and to see what our options would be.
Thanks. Just from what our code provides, so that everyone has the context. The code identifies the State Street lot as municipal lot number 2. The code also provides that municipal lot 2 has 40 spaces, or should have 40 spaces, designated for members of the fire department and municipal employees. The code permits tag parking in municipal lot, and municipal lot 2 can have tag parking for daytime, nighttime, or day-evening, depending on the type of tag. And as the chief has indicated, and as I think Chief Sylvester will mention in a few minutes, that lot, is used by fire, it's used by police, but is also used by folks in the area who just, it's parking there. It's not listed specifically as a municipal lot with any signs, but it's obviously understood to be that way. And one of the suggestions is that, and I think Chief Minicchio had indicated that one of the problems, I think, was primarily with evening parking, that it is where
Evening it gets a lot worse, yes.
And so it may be that the overnight and nighttime parking that is otherwise permitted by tags at that location can be changed so that it does no longer, in fact, has that particular provision under the code. It would have to be a code change, because as of right now, our code allows parking at that location. And Chief, just help me with something. I was just there today. I know it says 40 spaces. I think I counted actually 33 lined, or am I, and that, I was not a math whiz, but
Yeah.
I didn't see 40.
Yeah, there's only 40 spots in the lot to begin with, yeah.
Okay,
And then, as currently parking in the lot right now is OFD members, OPD members, town court employees, and the public. And
okay,
there's certain times there's commercial vehicles in there.
yes. And I should point out, the one thing that's clear from the code is that commercial vehicles are not permitted to park in that lot. That there's a specific exemption in the code with regard to municipal lot 2, that no tags are to be issued for commercial vehicles for any term parking within what we designate as municipal lot 2. So if there is an issue as to too many folks who should not be parking there at times when the fire department needs that lot, there are means by which we could, restrict the parking in that particular lot. To still allow the police to park their vehicles there, because they don't have any street parking, if I'm correct about that. You don't have any parking. That answers that question. So I think that's really, the issue potentially before the board as to how to, regulate that. Right now, we're talking about the one particular lot. I know there's other issues as to parking, but this is the one issue that the chief brought up to me as relates to the State Street lot. And while there is a lot, we know on the other side, which is the post office lot, that's not under our control. So the only lot that we can control is the one, which is at fire headquarters. So as I said, one of the possibilities would be that you do not permit overnight or nighttime tags or evening tags in that lot. I believe, Chief, correct me, are there tags for firefighters that are issued? Because I know the code talks about what's called an F tag.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, there's no tags right now. It's issued to any members.
Okay, so the members would have that. Then we would have to, deal, from the police end so that they have some available spots. It may be that, we don't want to even use it as a municipal lot. I mean, otherwise, because depending on the number of available spots and how many are using it between fire and police, that's something else that this board may want to consider in terms of whether or not it's actually a municipal lot that should be effectively used by the public when it is in fact immediately adjacent to the fire headquarters and in back of police headquarters and the court facility as well. So those are different options that are there, but I just wanted to bring that before everybody today because it was a matter that the chief had raised with me.
Comments and questions?
I actually would like to hear what our police chief has any comments from that before.
Sure. So, just to be a little bit more specific on who uses this lot, there's 5 entities that share this parking lot right now, and it was never built with that in mind. This was built originally for 2 fire companies plus fire headquarters, which people don't always give credit to, but there's a significant amount of traffic that goes through the command aspect of this building. You then have 2 companies that oftentimes will have events simultaneously. You have the village police department and you have the town court. As far as the police department, there is no legal place for a police officer to park on the street at nighttime. Our officers are not entitled to overnight tags based on the statute, and Academy Place has no overnight parking. So what we had done historically was to park on the street and offer our officers discretion in the idea that otherwise they couldn't come to work. Several years back, we had negotiated a deal with the fire department in order to sort of use a corner of their lot. That's expanded since the town court began parking back there. They saw it as a safety concern, to my knowledge. But the absence of signs, as best as I can recall, was an intentional move because prior administrations didn't want enforcement going on there. There was an attempt to sort of get along with the neighborhood, and as much as I always support those kind of initiatives, we've come to a point now where 5 entities sharing a parking lot is causing an issue where firefighters coming to actually do their business as firefighters, police officers coming to work can't find a place to park. Beyond that, we've had a few issues in that parking lot with people exiting the establishment across the street and disturbances there, late night rowdiness and things of that sort. So it hasn't shown a great benefit for us. And again, one of the issues is with an absence of signing, it's impossible to enforce things because the people there would have no notice that they're not permitted to park.
Well, right now they are permitted to park, so we would have to change the
Right
code
now-
and then have signs that reflect whatever the.
Right now, they're permitted to park if they have a permit, but right now there's no sign indicating that you are required to have a permit there. This is a unique property. To my knowledge, it's the only firehouse in the village that is even been up for conversation of neighbors or local residents parking in it. If you go to the other firehouses, they're all treated as private lots, property of the company, and it would be unusual for someone to park there without membership in the company.
Questions and comments? Sure, John.
Yeah, I mean, I was the one that kind of moved this along, based on conversations that I've had with fire chiefs and also with Chief Sylvester. I think there should be a dedicated parking lot to first responders, I think, and obviously the folks from the court facility. The fact that there's no place for our police officers to park when they're coming to work, that in and of itself is a little, that's a little disturbing to me, and I actually didn't realize that until I'd spoken to Chief Sylvester. But you know, I think we need to do the right thing by first responders. I think they need to have a place to park. They need to be able to come to their calls and not have to worry about where they're going to park because they need to get into an emergency vehicle to go do their business. So you know, I would be in favor of the suggestion of council, and you know, that we amend the law to make it so.
My one concern is that if we remove, if we designate the lot, there of course have been people who've been parking there 19 years. So the real question is, where do we make additional spots at? Because particularly on Academy Street, Academy Place, people have gotten tickets because it's not necessarily overnight parking, but then there's no sign. You know, it's somewhat of a mess. So I think we need to, if we're going to move in this direction, we definitely need to talk to people in the surrounding communities, because this has been a lot that's been shared via community, via cops, via firemen, and of the such. I wouldn't want to move hastily without giving people the you know, the up that, hey, we're about to make this move. And I do think that in general we need to just figure out, you know, can we expand parking around the surrounding areas, because it is a congested street and a lot of people do use that street.
Are we finding that it's people who are using this during the evening because they're going to a social occasion across the street, or is it people who are parking there overnight who would otherwise need to find some other overnight tag parking?
I think it would be a mixture. Be a mixture of both. When the events do happen across the street, yeah, it gets packed a lot faster. But you know, when there's an event, there's always about 8 cars that are from the surrounding area. That I don't know if they have tags or not, but we never moved that forward to investigate that far who registered owners were.
So one of the issues you find in this particular area also is that there's a number of houses across the street, several of them multi-dwellings, and they don't have street access because they live in a fire zone, in a fire lane. So, you know, that's a daily battle in and of itself, is having the commercial trucks move out of the fire lane because one of the residents there has commercial vehicles. So that's one thing. The other thing is in multi-dwellings, most of these were not built with driveways sufficient to house a number of cars. That's just a fact of life in all of Westchester probably at this point. But one of the things that's gone on for a few years now, at least, because this building is not all that old, is that if the signs in fact were erected when the law was put into place for daytime, nighttime parking, the people that park there would not all be permitted because they don't all have those permits right now. But because there's no sign that prohibits them from doing that, although it's in the code, at that point it would be wrong for us to write those tickets. So that's part of the reason that we're not filtering some of those vehicles out now. So I agree that there should be some notice given to the neighborhood, but I think that some of those problems are going to be inevitable no matter which way we move in this. Even if we allowed the people to continue parking there, some of those people still would not be allowed to park in this lot.
Comments or questions over here? Oh, go ahead, please.
Can I get, yeah.
Please.
I agree with the concern that you guys have, and just to put us a little bit more in perspective, I guess our police department, our fire department have the same issues of a lot of our members in our community as well, which is something that we're trying to solve some way, somehow, in the different ways that we're trying to modify our laws. Going back to your concern, and that's something that I have talked to my colleagues on different occasions, something that I have talked to some of our chiefs, our fire chiefs and our police chief, is Academy Place. I'm not sure if that will solve all the issues that we have on parking on the State Street and the Spring Street, that there's a lot of that happening, but I think we'll try to minimize a little bit of what the congestion traffic is. And now that this is not a whole door that has opened to my speech, so to speak, but it's a little bit of a sleep that I wasn't going to do this today, but I'm going to do it now that you guys are here. and had opened that little bit of window, is to make Academy one way and have diagonal parking, and that will solve some of the issues that we have in parking in there. I have talked to the fire chiefs several occasions, about 2 years ago, and some of them did not have a problem with that at all. I've talked to some of the members. I've talked to some of the members in the police department that did not object to that idea. I know, Kevin,
not me.
you have. I know that. I know it's not you. I didn't say chief, but but that's something I think, I agree with John. We should definitely dedicate this particular lot as, for our emergency service employees, fire department, police department, and court. But I think even regardless of with 39 spaces or 40 spaces in a lot, at some point when this was built, it was with in mind that it had some sort of accommodation for the people that were losing spaces because they are in a fire lane, that they cannot park in front of the properties. So where are we going to do with that? So we have to have some sort of a balance at the same time. So I think, again, by making Academy a one-way, that will help alleviate some of what the concerns are, because we do, I get a lot of complaints of what's going on overnight parking on State Street a lot, and you, Kevin, and I have talked about that too. So I put it out there. Where it goes, we'll see. But I think making Academy one way will help, not solve the whole issue, but it will help alleviate a lot of the stuff. And I have other ideas that it's not related to this, but.
Sure. All right, so just to address a couple things there, the folks that live across the street from fire headquarters have been in that fire lane for as long as I've been alive, been in the fire department, or around it at least as long as I can remember, generations. So that's not a new issue for the folks that live there. With regard to Academy Place, I'm not opposed to investigating different solutions there. I don't know why it's listed as not as an overnight parking street. I'm imagining that based on the previous setup that was there when that lot was there and curb cuts and things that existed, there may not have been room. Angled parking, we use that during snowstorms for police cars because it's the only place to put our cars so that we can plow our lot. So it's not a bad idea. The one question that I think we'd have to answer is, can the Beeline buses still fit through? With regard to one-way streets on the driveway of a police station, I have to be a hard no on that one. We have to have access to be able to leave our police station in both directions when we come out of the driveway. So that's a significant safety concern. However, all the rest of the things that you're suggesting, I think could be valuable help to try and alleviate this a
Let me
little
ask you this. In a case of an emergency, regardless of which direction the sign says, you guys have lights and sirens.
Yeah, but they can't go against the one-way.
Yeah, well, you can, absolutely, and we do all the
So
time.
it's safe.
It's not the best option.
I get
And
it.
what
but
I
we're
wouldn't
not
wanna do
talking
is
about-
create a
But we're not
situation-
talking about a whole length of a street. It's literally,
10 yards.
Come take a ride with me. We'll turn the lights on and go the wrong way down a one-way street, and I'll show you why we don't want to do it.
let me know that. I can definitely go for a ride along like that.
I'm going to take that back immediately.
Trustee Levin, we haven't heard from you.
Well, I mean, I think the issue is that this has been on the books, but spaces were taken, and we can't just let time go by and say, we forgot that that's why it was done in the first place, et cetera. So we have a parking issue. I mean, I think the signage is a big deal. I think, my point of view about timing is that you don't do things quickly about this stuff. Notices have to go to the public. An explanation has to be communicated, that it's become, I'm not clear if the population of police has increased and the population of fire department. Also, you have an issue, right? Because you should have tags. Because unless you guys all know each other, I don't know how you know which is a fire department person's car, right? Like, we have tags. So you need to have tags. So that's another piece of communication. Not only so that people who go around ticketing know that it's a car there for business and not, to hang out, but an actual reason the car is there, but also that other people in the community sit there and go and look to the window and go, oh, okay, that's a first responder and that's their parking. It's not just anybody. I mean, so communication and the consistency is a big thing. I think the signage should go up, even if we don't change a law. We should at least do what is already on the books and say that, but we need to sort of put notices out and say effective, January 1st, or, something, so that people can find space. I think commercial vehicles don't belong there to begin with, and that should also be a part of the information and signage, because we've had that discussion. People who have a business and have commercial vehicles need to find a place for those commercial vehicles, because they're running a business, and all businesses have cost of doing business. And owning a van that's a part of business, then you gotta find parking for it. So I think the signage issue for me actually is the first piece, because you have to let people know something's happening. Look, I think that we are gonna have to create space for the first responders, the people who work, and make sure that, those spaces are assigned to them. I don't know where to find parking for people. We have a parking problem. So this
And not
comes
only-
into a bigger
yeah.
discussion.
And not only that, Kevin and I had conversations in regards to, the police department and how they park. And it's not all the officers that park there. It's just some few members on each shift, I believe. Because they do park in the
whoever's
street
working.
sometimes, pretty
Right
much.
now, we
right?
have 15 cars parked in that lot of the 40 spots, so we're taking up a significant portion of that lot.
Okay.
That's right now. Changes shift to shift, day to day.
And how many do you normally have? How many, I mean, is it so different from day to day?
For us?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on if there's a fire, and then depending if there's a fire or not. The breakdown pretty much of the 4 spots is 4 of them are designated for our apparatus drivers, because we have 3 apparatus in that building. So we have to keep a spot for them right in front so they can get to the truck.
Right.
One of them is designated for myself, the chief, so that we can get there. And then we have our OFD dispatcher that has his own spot so that he can do his work in the dispatcher office. So that pretty much leaves 32 spots left for the rest, yeah,
handicap.
2 handicap spots are also in the lot. And that leaves 32 left for the FD, PD, and town court, and public.
Handicap spots could be actually moved off that lot.
Debbie, did you want to, did you want to
No,
weigh in?
can't. Legally,
They
you
don't
can't.
have any.
Debbie, please.
in the
So,
place.
For the dispatch.
Welcome.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Has to be accessible.
I would like an opportunity to look at this and work with the chiefs, both the fire and the police, with engineering as well, so that it gives me a better understanding of exactly where this lies and what the parking options are in that area. I know that during the interviewing process, we did talk about parking being an issue throughout the whole village, but I would like a chance to look it over and see if we can work out some solutions with the council and the chiefs, if that would be okay.
I think that's a great next step. I just want to sort of reflect on everything that I was hearing here. One of the simple things is getting F tags for all the fire department members so that they can park there without any question if we make any changes here. I would, if we are considering changing, when we say put up signage for whatever exists in the law right now, that's exactly what they do not want, what you guys do not want, because you don't want people to know that they could,
Work over
with
Park
their
there, right.
overnight tag, just park there overnight, because that would exacerbate the problems that you have. Listening to what, the point that trustee Bazemore is making is, yeah, but what about all these people that live on State Street and they need overnight tag parking? When Academy was redone with the major construction project that had there, it was never, there was never, and there's no parking regulations, I don't believe, attributed to Academy Place. There's no I mean, aside from there's no overnight parking anywhere except where it's designated by tag parking, there's no painted lines. So it seems like I'm a little more sympathetic to what the chief is saying about the one-way thing, but also because I believe when the engineer looked at the potential for how many spots we would actually gain by doing angled parking because of like those big driveways that the police department has on the end, and then there's a couple of other more cut curves, we don't really gain a lot of parking by creating angled parking. We just create the, okay. Well, anyway, so you're gonna go there with the engineer and figure it out.
it's not for
But
us.
if we maintain the status quo of a two-directional street, I think it's certainly worth looking into, can we create some overnight tag parking, because there's certainly a need for it in that neighborhood. I really like the idea of encouraging town court employees and police departments at every shift to know that they have a designated lot that's adjacent to their property, and you can walk up the back there and go through the fence. And also that means that they no longer are as likely to park on Academy or in the metered spots, which are spots that can be used by the general public for other, and are more convenient for the general public for a lot of reasons. So that's kind of where my head would expect that the direction we're going to go in. But
Great.
I think it's wise for you to take a walk and talk to all of these
That'd be
folks
great.
who know it firsthand.
Right.
Is there anything that we haven't heard or considered? Do you feel like we understand, we're kind of wrapped our heads around the challenges
I
and
feel
the
we're making
goals?
progress, a lot, and I'm sure if more discussions can lead to a solution to the whole situation.
And I imagine we might get some phone calls and emails in the next 48 hours after this conversation goes out.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Oh, thanks for clarifying that. I actually misunderstood what he said.
So next up, actually, I'm going to ask trustees Codman and Basemore to update us.
Good night.
Good night, chiefs. And I'd like to welcome Alice Jostler to join us. Alice, would you like to join us at the table? You can actually have a seat, and we can chat about this exciting grant application.
Exciting, yes.
It is.
It's a challenge to
Wait,
make the
I wanna
budget
make sure
work.
you're-
It's,
Just want to make sure you're.
You're pretty masterful at it, so I'm optimistic.
oh,
One
okay.
of these chairs doesn't work right.
We don't want to trick
Something's gonna
Alice.
fall
Yeah.
right on top.
Can you push the microphone over for Alice?
Sure.
I got it.
I created a little
Speaker.
flyer for you guys, so
Thank you.
Thank you.
informational piece for you. So you guys were gonna introduce it, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sean
we're
and
gonna
contact
kick it
us.
off here, just here. Want to make sure that Tom Warren gets us as well, a copy of this, just so we can have a look at it.
I got
since-
it. I made 10 copies, right?
Well, we each got one. So, but before we get started, I just wanted to, Debbie stepped out for a moment. Debbie, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to meet Alice Jostler in person. Alice, Debbie is obviously our new village manager.
Welcome. Thank you.
I think I may have emailed you like a little 10-second thumbnail of who Alice is and all of the hats she has worn in our community over the years. But really, all of them tie into how can she help young people in our community to be safe and prosper. And
my
that's
focus,
this
kids.
really, and this is the latest project to help further that. And both trustees Basemore and Codman have been part of the planning process, so they're going to get us up to speed.
So I just want to start out by just giving a little bit of background of how we actually got to this place. We, in our intermunicipal meetings, we've been meeting with various stakeholders, our safety net organizations, police, fire, town and village, and we. As many of you may know, Francine Vernon who's been a tireless advocate here in the community, has always been pushing municipal government to be in, what is our role with regard to children in our community. So I decided to take her up on that, and over the last couple of months, I'd like to say starting in March, I've been sitting down with the school district, the library, and our recreation department, trying to figure out, what services do we offer? Is there overlap? Is there really a lack of programming? Is it the lack of awareness? Where exactly can our role be? And eventually, the different players started to come in the room. Ms. Jostler joined us, and this great opportunity for investing kids in the county grants. The opportunity came, and so today we're here. There was a meeting last Friday. I was unable to attend, and so I asked my colleague John Codman to attend the meeting, and he was able to attend as a representative of the village. So this has been kind of an ongoing thing as we try to look at ways that we can actually affect young people's lives in our village.
Yeah, so I jumped right in when Quantel asked me to go to the meeting, and it was certainly an education. I think that this is a very important grant because it's an opportunity for us to really address an underserved population, which is specifically middle school kids. And it's kind of like the donut hole, there's lots of stuff going on, up through 6th grade, and then 7th and 8th grade is kind of this empty space for after school programming and things of that nature. And then of course when you get into high school, there's all kinds of activities. There's plenty there. So this is a really interesting program. I think I think it's something worth pursuing. And I want to thank Alice for really herding the cats and getting all the people together to work with all the different groups. We've got the library involved, we've got the school and recreation, and one of the ways that we can help as a village is to help to administer the program.
Right.
From
Would be
a-
the fiscal agent, in
be
fact.
the fiscal agent. So, you know, I'm really in full support of this, and I'm going to throw it really over to Alice now and let her kind of talk about a little more of the details of what the program is and the way the village as an entity can support the proposal and the grant.
Okay. So I'm not sure which capacity. I work for the Open Door, and I'm on the Board of Trustees for the library, so it kind of overlaps in the work I do in terms of advocating and trying to improve infrastructure for kids, mostly teens is where I focus. And every 3 years, the Westchester Youth Bureau has these RFPs, requests for proposals, and they have two streams of money. One is called Invest in Kids, and it requires a 35% cash match. And the other one is New York Office of Children and Family Services, which does not require a match. The fiscal agents have to be nonprofits or municipalities. Our library isn't eligible because we're a school district library, and school districts can't apply. And we had been meeting with Quantel, and we had wanted to do like this whole survey, and we will when we get a new rec person. We will, like, you know, do more surveying. But a lot of surveying has already gone on. The coalition that I run, the Drug Free Community Coalition, Austin Communities of Care, we've been collecting risk and protection data and youth substance abuse data since 2003, and we administer surveys every 2 years, right? And you know, we know what the risk and protective factors are in our community. They haven't changed significantly. And John and Quantel really covered it, that we want to really provide some extended day coverage. It says here for 6th through 8th, but I think that we may focus on 7th and 8th because we do have an after-school program at the rec for 6th graders. That's a for-fee program, though, I believe, right?
Yes.
Right. So in any case, the Invest in Kids grant requires a 35% cash match, and we sort of decided that that might be a challenge to have a cash match. It's not an in-kind match. You know, it's easy to get a $35,000 in-kind match. We use this facility, whatever. But a cash match is more challenging. So when John attended the meeting on Friday, we had our library director, our teen librarian, myself, Francine Vernon, I guess that was it, right. And we decided that we would go for the Office of Children and Family Services funding stream. The grants are capped at $45,000, and if you notice the communities of focus, Ossining is one of them, and to our knowledge, in the past 4 cycles, we have not been awarded a grant, which is very troubling to us.
You know why?
Well, perhaps we didn't specify our cash match. It was maybe more of an in-kind match. But in the last go-round, it was really, they had to redo the whole process because it seemed a little challenging. We'll just leave it that way. So a whole bunch of stuff happened after the awards were given out 3 years ago, and they've assured us that the whole process is going to be a fairer process. So we really are hoping to bring some of this money back into Ossining because we don't have a youth bureau, and the youth bureaus, like in White Plains, Quantel has worked there. The youth bureau is awesome. We would love to work towards like a youth bureau model in Ossining, but to start a youth bureau is very challenging. Which is the one that has Greenberg, right?
Yes, Theodore Young.
Greenberg has this fantastic model going on, and we'd sort of love to get there, but we need to start providing more services and then going out and seeking funds to try to get to that. And I think that we'd all love to get to some sort of situation where we have a solid infrastructure, sustainable organization administering services for teenagers, because teens can sometimes make poor choices. And the more positive opportunities we provide for them, the better off, the better chance of them making better choices. So, in any case, the planning team for this grant has included, Francine and I have met with the superintendent and the school district grant writer. We've worked with the Austin Public Library director and the teen librarian, 2 trustees, and Francine, who represents WLS. So, like a lot of people who've been involved already. We want to apply for the full amount, which is $45,000. I do want to note that $45,000 sounds like, oh, wow, that's so much money. It's really not. The requirement is a year-round program. It doesn't have to happen 365 days a year, but there have to be activities in every month. So if you divide 45,000 by 30 kids, that's $1,500 a kid for a full year program. That's pretty cheap, right? So the challenges making this budget work are huge. And Karen LaRocca-Fells, the library director, Susie Zavarella, myself, and Francine met for 2.5 hours a few days ago, and we still haven't gotten the budget down below 50,000, and we're struggling, right? But we're going to make it work, right? We're going to do it. So I think what we're really looking for is the green light from you that the village will be the applying agency and that you would be administering the grant. I don't want to mislead you. John went to the meeting. There are a lot of forms. I will fill out the budget forms and the Office of Children and Community Service forms and write the grant with Francine and Karen and Susie at the library. But the village will have to take care of all these schedules, C through double Z forms, you know, involving insurance and all sorts of certifications. And I can go back. I know that you had shared your email, Deborah, with me, so I can, I believe there is an extra copy of this floating around somewhere. One of you guys has it, right?
I have one at home.
You have it, okay. So,
Well, it's available electronically. I mean,
Yeah,
we can,
so you
we
can
can
print
provide
it
all
out.
this, all the stuff
So-
electronically.
so we're really just looking for the green light from you to get all these schedules, forms filled out and certified. And they are really legal forms that you and Stuart would probably read carefully, including one related to Ireland, right? I don't know what
have
that
to-
was. That was so bizarre.
Does this involve travel?
No, it does
No,
not.
no,
It's very
Suddenly it
bizarre.
got that much more interesting.
Some archaic thing about doing business with
Northern Ireland. yeah,
Northern
it-
Ireland
yeah,
or something.
yeah,
It's
it was,
bizarre.
It was,
a
yeah,
muddy
there were some things that were mentioned at this workshop that kind of boggled my mind. But I you know, a blessing on you, Alice, for picking up the ball here. I feel strongly that this is something that the board should support. I think that,
Yeah.
you know, I think none of the forms or anything that they're asking for is extraordinary.
No, it's just filling
know,
out like
it's
the
just,
village, signing
yeah.
it and certifying and notarizing it.
Yeah.
I mean,
so,
it's all, I think it's all standard language, and we could certainly get started on that part of it right after Labor Day. I'll take the responsibility of, you know, putting it all together and getting it copied and getting it bound and handing in the 7 copies. And I just was on the phone with Francine on my way over here, because we've got to start writing. We're still struggling to get a budget together. Another thing that we would like to include in the budget is a Friday night opportunity at the rec center and at the library for middle schoolers. You know, we bought a laser tag system at the library, and one of our most popular teen activities has actually been laser tag with the cops, actually. The library is a pretty awesome place to do that because of all the shelving and stuff. So we're not looking for that every week, obviously, but, you know, maybe 4 times a year. You know, the Elks have been tremendous about doing programming for teens and movies outside. And, you know, there's a lot of opportunities that we can do to create safe spaces for middle schoolers. Our most at-risk kids with regard to making poor decisions are really like 8th graders going into 9th grade. And we can really group kids as 7th and 8th grade and then 9th and 10th grade. And then we have our 11th and 12th graders. And I do want to note actually that Ossining has some of the lowest substance abuse numbers in the county. We actually have a lot to be proud of in our community. that's usually directly correlated with the socioeconomics of a community. And I sit on the coalition of coalitions across the county, and we have amongst the lowest substance abuse with regard to teens in the county. But, you know, we are trying to strive to create the proverbial village for our kids. And that involves not just the schools and the library and the rec, but all of us coordinating together. And the services that we're going to provide will be at AMD, the library, and the rec. And we'll need your help transporting the kids from the middle school to the library or the rec.
When you say you need your help, you're saying using the recreation
Yes,
bands and
yes,
stuff? Okay.
yes.
So is the grant written for at-risk kids? Is that different from all kids at those
Well,
ages?
we're going to have to,
In other words, does it exclude certain kids in the community from participating?
I don't think we can exclude certain kids, but we can certainly encourage kids to to sign up. We would be working with the schools to target kids to sign up, and once we had done that, then we would open it up. After that, we would try to fill the spots with some more at-risk kids.
So how do you define at-risk kids?
Well, I can't answer that. I'd need to, we would be working with the social workers and the guidance counselors at the middle school. Right? Because what you might consider an at-risk kid might not be. You know, it's an individual situation. But the hope is to provide a free extended day, 3 to 6, several times a week for a group of kids. They'll be getting homework help, and then they'll be going to the library and getting various activities like yoga, African drumming, cooking, computers, technology stuff. You know, exposing kids, in some cases, to things that they probably haven't done before.
Typically, particularly with the OCFS grant, there will be certain criteria that certain kind of programs or thresholds that the grant has to address, whether it be
There's life areas.
life areas,
Touchstones.
you know,
We
that
have to
kind of
pick
thing.
one that we focus on. The choices are economic security, physical and emotional health, education, citizenship, civic engagement, and family. And we're more inclined to apply either for physical and emotional health or education.
I'm interested in
yeah,
integrated programs.
yes.
I'm
So
less
this is
interested in
so this is what I'm saying.
programs, even with good intent, that exclude people.
So you can't exclude. So typically,
Okay.
as long as you are adhering to those principles, if you have a spot for 30 kids and 30 kids sign up, those are the 30 kids that sign up.
But you're only informing the children of our community who go to public schools.
Yes,
You're
that is
only
true.
informing,
It is a public school program, you are
While-
correct.
right, while we have a very significant part of our population that pays taxes and also sends their kids to local Catholic schools, et cetera, they're not going to be included in this, even though they may need these services and their parents pay taxes here. They also pay privately for their school, but they also pay taxes for this into the public school system. They vote for the public school system, they pay for the public school system, but they will be excluded. I'm personally a believer that kids benefit from being around the entire community with all the good intentions. So I love the work that you're doing. This is not a criticism of the work you're doing, right? I think that there is a lack of, integrating people both in where they live and where they play and where they go after school is a benefit to children to be around all children equally. So I'm I got caught up with the word kids at risk and then who gets told about this program rather than all of the children of our community
Well,
whose
we
parents
can-
pay the taxes.
We can figure the communication piece out.
You may disagree with me, Alice. It's okay. You could
I
say
do.
I'm wrong.
I do
Okay.
disagree with you. I understand. I respect where you're coming from, but in this situation, I taught a parenting program this summer for the school district. We offered it in both English and Spanish. And, the things I'm hearing from a lot of middle school families, I'm sure it's the same in other places as well. But I will say that the group that I tend to work for is the public school group. We could certainly advertise this in other places, but they would have to get from where they are to AMD. You know, I think it just naturally lends itself to being an AMD program. Certainly at the library, I mean, we have access, and at the rec, kids from every area come and enjoy our programs. This program would, as we've designed it, would be aligned with the after-school program at AMD. I mean, that, it is. And we're aligning ourselves summer school-wise with the summer school programs. We're providing a 6-week extended day during the summer school program. So that is the design of the program.
And it's always full up?
Well, we've never done it before.
Right, because for the past 4 cycles, you haven't gone anything. Okay.
No, we have never applied with this specific model ever. The model that we've applied with before was a program at the rec and the library, which was doing career readiness and college visits. And I think our hope is that we were hoping maybe we would hit the grant with this one with middle school, and then when the next cycle comes around, we can expand it to be an add-on at the high school level, is sort of our thought right now. So I understand what you're saying, but we definitely did align it with public school. You're right.
But we just have a lot of Catholic schools here. You know, we have
Well, we have
local
one.
residents.
We
Well,
have,
well, long-standing, yeah.
but,
Okay.
you know, it is a public school program, there's no question.
It's a public school program, and I don't want to belabor this point too much because I
It was a
think there's,
question more
I think
than
there's bigger questions, you know, particularly the facilitation that we're specifically being asked for, that would be falling a lot initially on Stewart's desk, but then on an ongoing basis, the financial appropriations would come through
Yeah,
Tom's
the financial
office.
part, we would have to count on the village to administer, and the reporting, the budget involves a coordinator for the program, and the coordinator would be doing the outcome reporting for the grant. But we would definitely need the village to be administering the grant. They'd be administering the payroll for the people in the program as the fiscal agent.
And there's a coordinator, is that?
The coordinator would be an employee in the program.
Before we get off the answer, I'm not sure if I fully understand how Rika's question about the private schools. I just want, we're not excluding them. If any of them applied to participate, they would just have to, we wouldn't
They'd have to get to
necessarily
AMD.
be providing transportation. Okay.
Right,
But then, and I'm going to kind of piggyback in that, and I have a few more questions.
okay.
But you just asked us to facilitate transportation to the kids to get to different areas. So how we not, why are we excluding other kids from a private school to get their own transportation? So that's one question.
I hadn't honestly, you're sort of throwing me.
Yeah, no, but,
Ever been considered, you know, like,
no, but again, it's a
I'm not
question, so
thinking
now.
well on my feet tonight, I can tell you, I'm
Alright.
sorry about that.
I mean, I doubt you actually transport kids from St. Anne's to your rec center, or
Augustine's.
St. Augustine's. I mean, we typically, with the rec programs, you pick the kids up from Ossining schools, public schools, and then you.
St. Augustine's all get bused too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
St. Augustine's kids get bused. It's just that our busing program works that you go from
Right.
point A to point B, Monday through Friday. And this is not something that would be an everyday after-school program.
No,
So
we
I
can't
think kids
afford,
that can go
we can't
to
afford it, $45,000, we can't make it work.
St. Augustine students may get picked up outside their house in the morning and then get dropped off at the community center for after-school care.
And they're
But
paying
this
for
is a
that
little
program, by the way, right?
Oh, the one at the recreation? Yes,
Yeah.
everybody pays for that, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the deadline for this?
September 22nd.
Yeah, that's
It's
why I
very
asked to-
aggressive.
That's why I asked to put it on as soon as
Right,
possible,
okay.
because
Yeah,
we're
it's
we're
a
up
very
against the
aggressive
deadline here.
program.
and If we could, you know,
Wait,
go
I
ahead.
haven't finished, sorry,
Go ahead.
John. So how, and Tom, you're gonna have to help me out with this a little bit, because the administration portion of this, and I guess probably Stuart and Tom, how different is from, sometimes we are the liaison for, like, for IFCA when they ask for a grant, and we get the grant, and then we transfer the grant over to them. How different, Tom, will that be, the administration portion, I guess probably even to you, Allison, because, help me understand that, Tom, what do we do with the money after we get, we just got some grant money that went directly to IFCA, so one of their projects, renovations or rehabs.
You're talking about the $385,000 grant. That's, I kind of see that as different than what you're talking about tonight. And you're talking about filing the paperwork and such. We already have 2 small state aid grants for youth programs that we file, so, this is nothing new.
Okay.
We work on it in conjunction with the police department because I think it's for part of the youth officer work, and also with the recreation department for some of the services there, so.
Do you see any difference on this particular application? I know you haven't seen an application.
it
or-
Well, we haven't
sounds-
even written the application yet, so.
It
format
sounds like
of
the
the
same
application.
process in terms of submitting for reimbursement, and I'm sure that there's, other paperwork. It really sounds relatively minor.
In terms of employees, currently, I mean, and again, we have to trim the budget. We're really struggling to make the budget work, really struggling to get it down to 45,000. We're talking about paying TAs at AMD and paying a coordinator who will also be the supervising person for the grant, and contractors who come in and do some of the specialty programs. We're not talking about a huge number of people and then a very small supplies budget. Like, that's what we're talking. It's not a lot of people.
And the grant is for how long? A year, 2 years, 3?
It's a 1-year grant, but that is promised for 3 years if it's awarded. The Invest in Kids is a 3-year grant. The Children and Family Services grant is 3 1-year grants. It's very bizarre.
But automatically re-upped, it sounds
It's
like.
automatically re-upped for 3. It's a 3-year.
To reapply next year.
No, if it works, they
Well-
just say, fill out the form, like a
We
lot of
fill out an
grants.
updated,
You met the safety, you met the insurance, you
Right,
met this.
exactly.
Bam, you get it. They don't make you
Right.
go through the whole McGill all over again, right?
I hope not, no.
Listen, I think it's great. I mean, I think the program's great. I mean, we sort of have to make a decision tonight because you guys have no time to.
Unfortunately,
put it,
we
it's-
don't, yeah. I also want to say that this is, I don't know if you guys know, but this summer, we, in the community, we raised $14,000 to send 33 kids to a 4-day leadership conference. And Chief Sylvester, I just wrote your thank you note but didn't email it yet. Shelley Farrell went in kind to this grant, and she was the chaperone, one of the chaperones. There were 3 adult chaperones, myself, Shelley, and a social worker who went on her own time from the schools. So, we have a lot of really good collaborations already, and this is really going to strengthen support for middle school kids. We can never do enough for middle school. It's so important to imbue positive supports and bonding for kids in 7th and 8th and 9th grade. And my hope is that we can build this infrastructure in this grant cycle and then build more infrastructure at the high school level, because just as John said, there's a whole plethora of things available at the high school, but at the high school, even there are some kids who don't take advantage of that. So the next nut that we'll try to crack will be that. But for here, we're just trying to get middle schoolers in safe places for the extended time. The hours of 3 to 6 are well-known as the risky times for teens.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I just want to say that it wasn't a criticism of you in the research.
I
but
understand.
I've lived through both having parents with money and having no money in
Uh-huh.
my life, and I think integrated programs are better
Mm-hmm.
than non-integrated to an entire communities, and we also have to answer taxpayers. Having said that, I'm in support of anything that gets that age group
Mm-hmm.
into a focused environment and allows parents to work, because that 3 to 6 problem is also about working
It's about
parents,
working
and oftentimes working women, frankly, who have those kind of jobs. So I'm personally in support. I wish we had a little more time, but we
Yes.
usually don't get time. So Nothing new today than an independent.
I wish we had more time too, Rika.
Yeah, no,
I've been putting the grant together.
again, not blaming you, again, don't read into it, I just, it is
Yeah.
what it is. You're filling out forms based on someone else's requisites, and we appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Trustee Quesada, did you have another question?
No, I mean, it's in the concept. I mean, I have a stepdaughter. She's 12, 13. I have a 3-year-old in a college freshman. I totally understand the concept of helping teenagers. The way I was raised is a little bit different than kids nowadays, so to speak. Like my mom used to say when she was younger, like you guys are so different, and I don't understand what you're doing, and I think that's sometimes what goes on in life. And I think that's a great program. You guys do a lot of great work in the community. I guess just my concern is as we represent the entire community itself, and I want to say what Rika says. That's my sort of like my hurdle, so to speak, to that little bump on the road that I think I need to understand how do we fix that. We should not be limiting that sources. That is a great. You have a budget, definitely a tight budget, but I think it should be open to the community itself. So I think if we can figure that out, I'm 100% in support.
I mean,
of
let's
that.
be clear, we're
So,
talking
yeah.
about a very tiny number of
course.
kids here, right? I mean, it's,
30.
yeah.
Yeah, but if you can help one,
Perhaps even less,
yeah.
because coming up with a year-round program for $1,500 a year is, it's very tough. I mean, we've got fringe to put on to the employees. Like, if we could do all the employees as contractors, the budget would be simple. But we can't. We've got fringe, and fringe takes away, adds a quarter to the cost of every employee. So it's a big challenge. The library is certainly committed to housing much of it, and to, being the people that will hire the personnel, like offloading that from you, that we've got a number of people who work at the library who already are doing some of this work, and we're trying to expand that work and the kids that we reach. And it's a little challenging because we don't have a rec director right now, so we're going to sort of write in ish kind of things, swim or, aqua something, Scott Craven many years ago when we wrote one of these wanted to do kayaking in the pool. There were like a lot of cool things that we've tried, but we've never scored, and it, nothing irks me more. Well, there's a lot of things that irk me, but one of the things that really irks me is when I see a list of target communities and we haven't gotten the money in more than a decade. That ticks me off.
Not just you. We apply for grants and we never get.
Yeah.
Let's not say
sometimes get.
never.
No.
Sometimes get.
All right.
Yeah.
We get a
In the
lot of
past-
grants.
We get a lot of
Yes.
stuff.
I haven't weighed in yet, but
years,
Chief Sylvester wanted to ask a
Alice, maybe I
question.
can offer a suggestion. I know I'm coming to the game late here.
No, we were going to call you too.
Yeah, sure. If you're
We
open.
see you as a big partner.
Always do. If I can offer a suggestion, another option, I know that you sort of have this idea of an after-school extended stay thing and the middle schoolers. One of the projects that we've been investigating that we're hoping to work with the high school with this year, we went and spoke with the folks from Alliance for Safe Kids in Yorktown. They've got a youth court. And as I'm listening to you, a lot of the structure that you're talking about is something that would be ideal for this program. So if you're open to, maybe changing the concept of where you're going with this, the concept of a youth court operates on the idea that those that would come into the juvenile delinquent category, which is now going to increase with the raise the age up to the 17-year-olds. So we have more kids that would be going to family court. We tag them as juvenile
We
delinquents.
actually, Chief Sylvester, we had a youth court. And the
This
kids,
is not that. This is different.
well, we modeled it on the same thing as the
Right.
ASK people, and we did the same training. And I would absolutely welcome the concept of bringing a youth court back to Ossining. I'm not sure that it would align with this particular grant, but I'm totally committing myself to working with you to create a youth court again.
Well, we're going to
No
go forward with
question.
it. So if it fits into the grant, I'm
Okay.
hearing the things that you'd need for a grant.
Okay.
We're Our objective was to start it as a project for the school this year, or in conjunction with the school, where it would only be on a trial basis.
Okay.
For next year, we're looking for something where it would become a full up and running legal youth court, in conjunction with the Department of Probation and the Family Court. You know, things that they look for when they become more established, or to have a youth bureau, so you have an individual at least who's responsible for the administrative side of these things. So
Right, that's our
they told us
goal,
we'd
is to
need
get
one
there.
part-time employee in order to pull this off for the long term and make it sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, sort of the things they told us we'd need are sort of what you're spelling out there. So if you're interested in discussing maybe a change to your topic there, that's a great option for us to work together. Otherwise, we're
But
here.
we did, Kevin, we did put together a youth court. And unfortunately, what happened was no cases got diverted to it.
Oh, I'll fix that.
Well, I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I've got a whole file of youth court materials, and the people from Yorktown, in fact, came down and did this training. It was probably like nine years ago.
Yeah.
We did it, and all the kids have aged out of it. And I think, I'm so happy that he said he wants to do that, because that is such a great positive youth development program. It's really incredible, but no, they wouldn't divert cases to the kids.
So we gotta, I think we're kind of diverting a little bit
Right.
here. I'm
We
glad for the
definitely-
suggestion by the
We need to
chief, but
complete tonight's
yeah,
track.
we
I
need
don't,
to, we need to
I
keep
don't
going.
think I can change this, but I'm happy to work with you on finding funding for a youth court.
Well, we've certainly all learned a lot about the terrific opportunities that
Right.
are on the horizon for Ossinings's youth.
Right.
And I think I'm hearing consensus among my colleagues on the board to be supportive of the village moving forward, with you moving forward with the application.
Okay.
And us moving forward with providing the support and facilitation. I'm looking at you, Mr. Khan, because the first round is going to be more on your desk than anybody else. And Tom kind of weighed in that he thinks this is akin to many of the other facilitations that he makes happen for us. So the staff is on board that this seems reasonable to add to your work?
I think that's fine. It's, in many ways, it sounds similar, at least initially, to the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I think what we would need is a resolution from the board, that it's the sense of the board to go forward with being basically the agent for this
The
particular.
fiscal agent, yeah.
For this Alice, just one question. You mentioned employees. Who are they going to be employees of? In other words, who's the employer?
Well, the employer will be the village.
So the village is going to be employing these? I just want to be clear.
We'll have to, I mean, that would be what the administration of the grant would be essentially the payroll for the program. The library is committing to sort of be the supervisor of the employees to determine if they are, you know, on a
Those,
day-to-day.
yeah, those details can be worked out,
Okay,
'cause
so Debbie's also been here, not yet, even on the payroll yet, so.
Yeah, right.
So I think, especially if we're talking about employees working for the village, they would ultimately be reporting to you, Debbie, so you may want to be able to sit down before this is submitted on the
Does it
22nd,
allow
understand it
you-
a little more.
Does it allow you to do contract employees?
Yes, but it stipulates, we would love to do it all contract employees, but people who, it specifically says that people who are regularly there every week have to be constituted as personnel with
We
French.
can work on that.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Then my only complaint is you're doing laser tag and you haven't told me about it.
Well, that was a while ago. That was, I think it was last summer. When did you guys do it? Last summer?
All right, well, whenever you next do it, I would love to,
Your kids might be
participate.
too young, but,
I was talking about me.
oh, about you, okay. Laser tag with the mayor.
trustees
I would love it.
Well, that
Okay.
would be fun with
And
our
I'm a
teens. That would
pretty
be good.
shot. I will warn all these nice young people, and I would look forward to that very much. So, there's no means testing for this, though. That's become clear, right?
No, what?
There's no means testing. It's a free program, but there's no means testing, meaning that we don't check the parent's
Financial
income
means.
level.
No, we're going to take, this isn't going to be based
I
on
assume that's
income.
stipulated.
This is going to be, well, there's no fee for the program.
Right.
And the initial registration, I think, will be referrals from within the school, the social workers and the guidance.
Okay.
To before, that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as means testing. There is no means testing.
No.
obviously. Okay. Okay. And actually, I think, you mentioned it's a little bit challenging because we don't have a superintendent of recreation right now. So talking about what those programs would be is you have to be a little vague, and I appreciate that. But the fact that this is being brought to Debbie at the moment that she's working on filling that position as one of her first big actions as our manager is actually helpful, I would imagine, for you to know that this is one of the projects on the horizon, is expanding the youth programming and
Hopefully we'll get it. We don't
coordination.
know.
Whether you get it or not, it's a clear signal of what the community is looking for and what we're going to be looking for as a recreation superintendent to be able to have the capacity to take on. So, all right.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Good to have you here, Alice.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
We have a big topic coming up. It's almost 9 o'clock. Sometimes we give ourselves a 5-minute break. I think I would like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come right back and we'll get into our housing policy
Oh, yes.
conversation.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
And thanks so much for staying tuned. And right now, we're going to move on to one of the highlights of the evening, which is our review of the soon-to-be final report from Kevin Dworka LLC regarding our housing policies. And welcome, Lynn Brooks-Avni, to the table. I know you've worked very closely with Kevin throughout this whole process, and we are excited to be able to for the first time, have a public discussion about what are the recommendations after these months of research and delving into the data and the numbers that represent our community, as well as doing a significant amount of community outreach and putting that all into a 4-section report. But it looks like from what you've handed us, we're really going to focus on section 4, which is the recommendations tonight. Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
So thank you, Mayor, and the board. Just so I left all of you. You guys, sorry, Tom. Good. Okay. Thank you to the mayor and the board. Just so you know, I left you the policy framework, which is technical paper number 4 on your table, but technical papers 1 through 3 are here if you want to reference it. But most of our discussion tonight is really going to be focused on technical paper 4, so I left you a copy so you can reference it should you have any questions. Just even though I'm sure you guys remember really well, but just to provide some backup, you all recall we started this process back in January, February, and we retained Kevin and his team to take a really comprehensive look at housing in the village, and to really assess our regulatory policies, our rules, and look at our demographics and some of the economics, and help us as a village better understand what actions we could take to help meet the diverse housing needs of both our present and our future residents. If you recall, for those of you who remember Kevin's presentation in June and the presentations he made to the public, there were initially 12 recommendations that came out of the whole process. In the final policy framework, technical paper number 4, there are only 8. He makes a key footnote that that tells you, but if you look back at both documents, you can see that nothing was eliminated from the original 12 recommendations. He just consolidated and better found, some better locations to link some of the recommendations and kind of combine them into one overall arching recommendation that hit several points instead of 12 separate recommendations. So there are 8 recommendations. We're going to go through all 8 of them tonight. The other key thing in this policy framework document is he outlines an implementation guide, and he maps it out as a 36-month or 3-year process, and he caveats it that it should follow a well thought out order that him and his team have looked at. So as part of this process, there were the process commenced in March with 2 public listening sessions and initial stakeholder meetings. There was a presentation to this board, if you recall, on March 22nd, which basically covered technical paper 1, which is a quantitative analysis and a demographic analysis of the village as a whole, pulling from census data and the American Community Survey data. And then we held an additional public session in April to try and capture some of the hard to reach population in our village. And then he came back and spoke to us, and he kind of combined a regulatory assessment with some of the initial policy frameworks in June, and then this was tightened with we had a survey that was up for the public, both in English and in Spanish, on the website, and then staff analysis and board input. So to start from the very beginning, so of the eight policies that he outlines, the first thing that he recommends is that the village consider hiring an economic development person, and that has the skill sets to really help us create a development strategy that looks at how we can increase our tax base and attract new businesses, maximize development opportunities, and really look at how we have underutilized lots and vacant parcels in the village. Of course, there's a financial cost to that, and then he also highlights the fact that the DRWC, as you know, was convened for a 90-day cycle, and one of their recommendations kind of aligned with that of hiring a similar strategist. Do you want to add anything to that, Stuart?
Not to policy strategy number one, Lynn. No,
Okay.
I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. So in strategy number 2, he addresses he discusses the idea of adopting a proactive approach to building code enforcement, and he stresses that the village is starting out on the right path. We're starting to realign our own internal local rules with the state's building code. We're trying to make it better understood. Right now, there's also some challenges that are faced. We have an understaffing in the building department. He discusses a proactive judicial judicial process. There's also a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness of the building code by both tenants and landlords. Some of the recommendations he cites were the village is already engaged with, reactivating the landlord-tenant council, which we heard last week from 2 of the trustees here, reestablishing like a code enforcement appeals board, which the village is well under process, and we've fully staffed it. He also discusses like establishing sort of like the police department has, like code enforcement beats, kind of like making specific people more aware of what's going on in specific neighborhoods or parts of the village. He discusses creating a hotline for violations. He recommends a telephone one. We actually have right now an email link on the website, but kind of trying to create a greater awareness, an understanding of where there are violations, when there are violations. He talks about engaging community members and getting them involved. And the other thing that he talks about, which this board has talked about in several iterations, is the idea of requiring some sort of precondition prior to the transfer of sale of property, whether it's called a CO or a certificate of compliance or some other document of that name. And then lastly, he also discusses the need to think about potential financial penalties for derelict properties for people that choose to avoid getting a building permit and like need a slap on the wrist for doing what they're doing without the proper permission. Any thoughts, comments, Stuart? I know Stuart and I have had many discussions on this, sorry, so we're tag teaming this tonight. I neglected to say that.
The report does note a lot of work that the village has already done with regard to code enforcement, and particularly with implementations of sections of the New York State Code, operating permits and the like. I think the takeaway from this particular policy strategy is that, as we all knew, there is still more to do in the area of code enforcement. And it's not just manpower, it's a variety of things, making the public aware of what the code requires. If you look at Ossning's code, and frankly, if you look at other municipalities' codes, a lot of what is required of building owners is in different places in the code. And you may look under housing and maintenance, but actually you need to look under demolition, or you need to look under the zoning and planning section. That's just the nature of how it was codified. But it is important for both tenants, owners, contractors to be aware of what the requirements are. We have now fully adopted the uniform code for the state, which are all the various volumes of the international code. And as I've reported to this board, when orders to remedy are now issued, they are issued for both violations of the village code as well as of the state code, which provides benefits in terms of enforcement activity. The Code Board of Appeals has met a couple of times already and is now planning to meet, regularly, I think the third Thursday of every month, and will start putting their policies and procedures together. One of the things we will be providing them with are forms that we've used for the OTRs and complaints so that they can see what that looks like. We were able to put together a list of all of the complaints that cover the sections of the code that they will be involved with over the past 4 or 5 years. So they'll get an idea of how many of those violations are, where they are, the types of violations. And we've gone over that. Joe Agostinelli, our building inspector, was at those meetings as well. And I think, again, a lot of what is in these this proactive approach, the village already does in terms of reporting. One thing that Lynn mentioned, the requirement for some type of document when there is a property transfer is something that's seen, for example, in Peekskill. And it would remove the problems that we have where someone says, I built a dormer on my house 45 years ago, and I have no certificate of occupancy. So what am I supposed to do about that? If you were able to transfer and do this, you would be able to do that. And this would also obviously help our first responders. It would make the particular homes safer and buildings safer for people to go into. And I think it's clearly a very important part of the various policy strategies that Kevin's office came up with.
Yeah, I guess my only comment on this is that I'm particularly pleased with this recommendation and that it's so high on the list, which is all the things that you pointed out, that we pretty much figured out that this is an area that we need to focus on, and this board in particular has been much more proactive in wanting to update code enforcement to get the personnel in place, starting by changing the law earlier this year. And I know that there's more steps in that process to make it happen, but this really affirms that we were on the right track and gives us a few more areas to recognize that we might be able to do it even better. But I think this is a pretty obvious one, that not only are we supportive of so much of this, we've already started putting it in motion. So this is kind of one of the easier of the 8 to move forward, so, at least in my estimation, unless there's a glaring difference of opinion among my colleagues. You're smiling for. All right.
Actually,
Please. You want to tell everybody about certificate of occupancy? Or
I wish that's just one of the things, but I'm actually glad to see that actually has made it.
Made the list.
Made the list, correct. And I want to thank you, Stuart, because you did bring something up, and we talked about communicating to the public all the time in different topics or different venues that we bring up as a board. But I think this is something essential, that even though we have to do all this, but education to the community and to the public is something essential that I think is here, but it's not clear within the list itself. I think with all the points that we're trying to put together is there, it's just not clear enough. And I hate the fact that I unfortunately I only did one of those, and it was okay, but I think as a village, we need to do more of these workshops. The building department, planning department, just as a point of education to the community itself. And we have the paperwork, we have all that stuff. It's just a matter of setting up a time and the time from our staff to do it, and a date to establish that. And I think we can cover a lot of these You know, point number 3, organize community members to be part of that. That could be a point of that, and establish some of the stuff if that's the direction of the board wants to do. You know, there could be, we can bring up the financial portion of this and what could be, but I think part of that is the education and how we educate our community itself. And I think taking some of the initiative that we did about 4 years ago and bringing that back into life, I think that would be essential for us to cover some of the stuff that we have in here and do a little bit more at that time. That would be my suggestion on this.
I can chime in.
Anytime you want, Debbie.
This is
You
so
always have the
awesome.
floor.
I mean, from my perspective and just a very quick reading of this, these are perfect steps for the Code Enforcement Division. You know, I have set up a couple of offices for code enforcement, and we've really looked at the not only a proactive approach to code enforcement, but also a customer service relationship, where we actually do the education that you're all talking about, and go out and meet with people and give them the heads up on what the expectations are for the village. And I think that this is going to really lay a great framework for how we can move forward. It's good work. So.
All right.
Any other comments or? Okay. Okay. So the third strategy he stresses is that we modify the village's development incentive program, and he basically suggests that we come up with a proactive program that ensures that we have the correct tax incentives for new development that essentially result in additional housing units that meet the community's need. And so we're aligning our housing policy and our development policies together so that the benefits we elicit from developers, it wouldn't just have to affect housing, but he focused on housing for this report, but we could have aligned it to meet, you know, the benefits that the community really needs. And then to kind of really determine an optimal land use scenarios for all the development sites based on the village's own housing and economic development objectives for the village as a whole. And then to package these incentives and market them to the developers so that we can bring in the right developers to develop in the village, and that so everyone starts at the beginning of the process by understanding the expectations that the village has of the developer and the expectation the developer has that the village is going to provide or could provide as incentives.
So for me, the issue here was that I'm not sure what the economic development policy of the village is. Because I don't believe anywhere in all of these documents he ever stated that.
Well, we don't have one.
That would be
outlet, so
exactly
just-
my point.
Right, so that's why strategy number 1, he talks about for the hiring an economic development person, that would be their number 1 task, to come up with a strategy.
Right, so until you do that, it's very sequential.
Right, which is, yes.
Right, so you can't do 5 until you finish 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can't do 7 until you finish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the way this is recommended. I'm not in disagreement with it, but not knowing where the finish line is a real problem. It almost speaks to saying that how does one even look at the properties that need to be developed that we own until we get to the other pieces first, based on his recommendations. I mean, that's why, unless I'm totally missing it, but the big picture here is having one. Is having a big picture in the first place, frankly, because we get a lot of tactics and we get lots of people with lots of tactics, including developers that we then react to. So I like his study for that, but I almost think that for me is the biggest storyline that comes out of this study, because if you have different departments, so there are people who manage by believing that you fix everything on the margins, and there are people who manage by believing that you have a finish line and that one goes towards a finish line. Otherwise, how does one run a race? So, I think that's a big decision that has to be done, both by management and all that. I mean, is that something that you guys have discussed, or, we're talking about, what code to put in. Meanwhile, I'm not quite sure what the policy is,
We didn't really get into that, to be
Okay.
honest. One of the things that Kevin did, and as did the downtown committee, there were extensive maps of, for example, where are all the vacant properties, where's all the village-owned properties? But in terms of a policy as to, you know, do you do pilots, do you do land banks, do you do, you know, CDC? That, you know, Kevin does, this report does not come down any particular way. There's nothing to that. There's no policy statement in that regard.
Oh, I think what he's saying is that we need one in this.
Right,
village.
and he doesn't provide the,
Right.
and I think if we were to ask him, he would probably say wasn't his role to actually provide us with the policy more than it was just to sort of say, you need one.
I mean, I hear you're saying that we don't have an economic development policy that's been clearly stated. But not only in strategy one is he saying we should hire somebody who's really focused on economic development, but the policy purpose itself does lay out something of an economic development policy that is based on the research that he's done in this study, which is once we appoint this person to design and implement an inclusive economic development strategy that increases the commercial tax base, attracts new businesses, increases employment opportunities for lower income residents, maximizes development opportunities, and complements the village's housing policy framework. I'm sure that could be fleshed out more and phrased differently so that you're hearing it more as an economic development policy. But my only concern is that we're going to sit around a table and talk about what's an economic development policy, what is our economic development policy, and how is that different with these 5 people than it will be with the next 5 people, with the next 5 people. And I mean, there were some pretty clear things that came out of this study, which, you know, number one being, you know, increase our commercial tax base. That's a really big one that resonates with people in every neighborhood. And I think we do have some understanding of what our economic development policy is. And if there's some way that we need to clarify it, then let's clarify it. I just don't want us to sit around and do focus groups on what's our economic development policy for 3 more months. Debbie?
So what I would say is that a lot of these policies that are being recommended, we can do concurrently. And it is possible to do little bits and pieces of them at the same time. I do believe that we need to have a fully vetted economic development policy, but I don't think it'll be as difficult as you think it is, because I think having talked with all of you, you have a very good idea of what you want it to be. And therefore, and I see a lot of things that are in this document that reflect what you've already said. So it's just a matter of really taking one day where we sit around and put that together. Putting an economic strategy together is really more than just a housing. It's really flushing out who our customers are, who our residents are, who we're serving, and what our expectations are for how we want to form and mold that. And so those are the kind of discussions that we're going to need to have in the future. But I think that the basis of this at least gives us some guidelines on the different things that Mr. Dworka has seen that we need to put together as a village. But I do think that we can do a lot of them simultaneously, not just one at a time. And I think that all of them, as we put them together, you're going to actually flush out more of your economic development policy. And I think that the overall goal is to create more jobs for the families that live here and increase their wealth capacity. And, you know, how do we take our environment and utilize it to the best of our abilities? So I think there'll be fun discussions, but I see that framework being in this document already.
We're up to policy 4.
Okay. So, policy 4, sorry. That's at the bottom.
The bottom of page 11.
No, I thought we already passed that. So.
Page 11.
So it's to expand the village's network of local housing developers, and basically to ensure that there's a more diverse group of builders and developers, and that we can also access innovative funding sources, align new development with both housing and economic development goals for the village. And some of the things that the report stresses is that we should inventory development sites throughout the village, make those sites viewable on our website, partner with local organizations, host developer outreach events, and then look at other organizations already have this, like the other CDCs, other community development corporations, like there's the Newburgh Land Bank, Community Land Trust, to better understand how we could partner with these entities or how we could actually and/or replicate them within the village. And that this would actually help the village ensure that new housing is in tune with both our housing goals and our economic development goals as a whole. And it might also help us attract developers, specifically developers that might specialize in things that the village might need, maybe like senior housing or affordable housing or transit-oriented development or whatever it is that the village determines is the key type of development that would help align the strategies. Do you have anything to add, or?
No, I think that one I think you got really fully covered.
Okay. Anyone have questions? Okay. So strategy number 5 was to really revise the village's affordable housing policy as a whole. And this was a large one. And it was really to look deeper and broader at the levels of affordability requirements for new housing development within the village. Right now we have, if you construct 6 units of housing, you have to have a set aside of 10% for 80% of AMI or less. And Kevin suggests that that while our policy is consistent with many in the county and the area, some within the Hudson Valley have set aside stricter standards and lowered AMI thresholds, and he suggests that we modify the policy to require that 20% of units in new buildings that construct 4 or more units are set aside as affordable for households making less than 60% AMI. And then he also suggests offering landowners tax incentives for voluntarily allocating 10% of their existing housing stock as affordable for households making between 40% and 60% of AMI. And then the other thing he really stresses is that they stipulate concrete buyout provisions that would incentivize developers to build on site. No developers have really used the buyout provision in our code right now, so we've obviously worked well, but those are his key strategies for housing policy. Was there anything, did you want to say something?
So, as you know, this is probably one of my reasons I ran for office, and I have to say I absolutely do agree. I've talked to the board a couple of years now, particularly about our buyout clause. Our buyout clause currently does not build not 1 inch of affordable housing based on 60% of the AMI, or even sometimes based on 80% of the AMI, depending on the family size. So I think these are, I think this particular strategy just talks about how we need to handle this thing at all angles. If we're doing 20% at 60% AMI, that'll definitely be a large catch basin than what currently exists right now. I don't know if we've asked IFCA to do like an analysis about the people who've actually been able to get into our affordable housing units, but we might be surprised to find that there are some out-of-town people being in those units because the 80% AMI is so high versus what's actually here in the area. So I think this was kind of dead on as far as, just looking at our strategies. This also involves looking at zoning strategies and density bonuses and making sure that things work out for the developer. And then, again, that buyout clause. If you're going to buy out of developing affordable housing, then let it be something that let it at least build a unit. So.
And you think that the way that this is recommended would encourage, because we've had very little money go into the affordable housing fund, and that fund, what we use it for now, primarily my understanding is for the contract to do the qualifications for the applicants that are part of our affordable housing program. But if we had a robust fund, then that fund might be able to be tied with perhaps, was that strategy number 3, whatever it was, to have like a land bank or work with some other agencies. And so if we had some significant money in that affordable housing fund, then that could be building affordable housing perhaps at an even lower area median income because there wouldn't be the same motivation that a developer has when they're building. But does this strategy incentivize developers who have perhaps would prefer not to have
Absolutely.
inclusionary zoning
You know, because
that really puts some
be-
significant dollars there?
because it's 20%, right? It's 20%. So you may have a developer who says, hey, I'm willing to do 10% of the building, and I want to, and then the other 10% I'd rather pay out. I mean, it's at 60% of the AMI, and I don't want to get too technical with, area median incomes, but
Section 1 of this report does a good job of that.
But 60% of the AMI, the reason, number one, I want to talk about 60% of the AMI is because a lot of people in our community are at that threshold. I mean, of course, yes, we have people below 30% of the AMI and 40% of the AMI, but a lot of working class people at 60% of the AMI. And that really, gets immediate housing for those people where the market may not, where the market may not just meet that housing need. And so at 20%, the developer may come to you and say, hey, you know what? 20% is a lot. You've given me this incentive here, so hey, I'll do 10%, but the other 10% I'm a buyout because it works with my numbers as far as, okay, I got 10 years to pay back this commercial loan. You're not providing subsidies to fill this gap, so I can do this part, and then the other part I'll just pay out.
And the dollar amounts make sense.
But that's it. The dollar. Well, currently the dollar amounts would have to change, right? Because you want to make sure that the buyout fee actually at least builds a unit at 60%.
And it would be indexed, the buyout fee? Because if we set a fixed number.
Yeah, no, you could. Yes, you could. There are ways.
Be tied to
exactly.
some
Yeah, some
number
county
that comes out
number.
regularly.
Yes, absolutely.
Because when people get a chance to read this report, which I believe will be early next week, we said we'd put this out to the public Tuesday. Section 1 is delving into the numbers and all the data, which is something really valuable that Kevin brings to us. When it looks at the household income numbers, when we say area median income, that's based on county area median income, and village median income and county median income do not coincide. We're at about median income in the village of Ossining is just over 60,000, and median income in the county is over 80,000. And that is if you're a county, and I don't know what household this is, but the household income of basically $84,000 is the median income in Westchester County. That means the person right in the middle of the county, whereas the person right in the middle of the median the village is just over 60,000. And so the person at 80% of the area median income in the county is actually higher than right in the middle, right, the median income in the village. So our affordable housing program right now is designed for people exactly at the median income of the village of Ossining. So we're not reaching anybody in the bottom half of our area median income of the village of Ossining with our current affordable housing program.
Absolutely.
That was the number that spoke to me on here, because we talk about area median income all the time, and I always lose track of what's what, but it's a significant number for us to keep in mind when we're talking about the real lives of the 26,000 people that are in here that we're trying to create
But
these policies
This
for.
housing, it doesn't get preferential treatment to people who live here, right?
Absolutely
There-
not. So
there's-
Legally, we can't.
legally we can't, but
Right, so there's no border. I mean, I get the threshold, and I agree with you. It doesn't reach the people in our community. It reaches other people, but we have no borders in
So-
this county, so it's for anybody that meets the criteria is eligible. You don't have, it's not Section 8 housing, it's affordable
So
housing.
I just want to go back to my statement. I said, I don't know if we've ever asked IFCA to actually look at the numbers of the people who've actually gone into some of those units. It may differ. We may not find 100% Ossining people, but the majority of them are. But also do understand that when it comes to affordable housing, I mean, this is Ossining. Most people who are in Ossining, if they know that there's affordable housing available, they're going to apply for the housing because it's Ossining. If you're in different parts of the county where transportation may be better, you may not want to lug it all the way up here versus living in, say, down county. So, as far as worrying about borders, I'm just saying that basically we need to make sure that the majority, that the housing that is being incentivized actually meets the need of the majority of the people in our community.
I think a better statement will be that we're going to have an affordable, if anything, that's one of the I guess one of the processes that this board will take is that Austin will be affordable, but I wouldn't want to be specific to the community itself because we cannot guarantee that everybody in the community will guarantee to be part of this process. Just like you said, Anifka, and that's the discussions that we have been having for the past almost 2 years. How do we guarantee that the affordable unit is actually going to go to the community?
We're not trying to guarantee. I think we actually just
That's
we just stated that.
No, we
Exactly.
can't,
And I think that's
Yeah.
that's the part that we need to make sure that if this goes through, it says we are making Austin affordable, but not to our community. Exactly.
right. And it's not a law that's going to stipulate where you live right now makes you ineligible or ineligible because that couldn't be the law. But de facto, there will be a disproportionate number of people who are in our community who are looking for a new home in our community. You see the applications of people who apply for affordable housing in our community. Do you find that the majority of applicants are current Ossipee residents or community members in some regard?
There is a large proportion of them that are in the last couple of rounds. So, yeah. But there are people that come from elsewhere.
Or they may have only lived here 6 months and are applying. So how you define it's bottom line is it's for everybody really. People will find out, and that's okay.
And the fact is, we're currently a community that provides housing options for people in a lot of different income brackets. We have part of our diversity is our housing diversity. And there are some communities in Westchester, many communities in Westchester, where the people who work in their schools, the people who work in their restaurants, the people who are their home care aides, they come in from other communities. And in our community, some of those folks get to live and work in the same community, and that's integral to who we have been and who our character is. And so the point is, if we are going to be building more housing, do we want to continue to encourage that kind of diversity in the folks who are able to live in our community? So, anyway, we've kind of gone off on an affordable housing conversation here, but
I think what Quantel is saying, though, the buyout piece is an interesting new piece. We talked about it, we've never analyzed it. So here's natural analysis of something we've sort of gone around in circles about. And now we've got quantitative, we've got some qualitative, which I think is helpful because we've only talked about it in sort of a theory in our own knowledge. So I'm happy to see this.
what's next?
Do you have anything to add or no? Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. So policy number 6 was to eliminate the regulatory barriers to housing development. So this kind of goes back to technical paper number 2 and some of our own documents, but he suggests that we revise and update the comprehensive plan and the zoning code to basically allow for multifamily construction in places where there is already a prevailing pattern for multifamily. When you go through the comprehensive plan, and it cites objectives that are relative to multifamily housing development and the preservation of affordable housing, but the comp plan actually lacks strong housing policy language. It also restricts as of right residential development, and it fails to identify geographic priority areas for high density residential development. For example, it specifically restricts 2-family and multifamily residential uses and sets them aside as conditional uses, which means it has to go to the planning board. And thus, even the simple conversion of a single family to a 2-family home in a 2-family district becomes administratively burdensome for a homeowner or even a developer that were to buy it and create a 2-family house. And lastly, the comprehensive plan creates challenges for housing development, since it specifically identifies areas where multifamily housing is not encouraged. For example, the general business district, the GB district, but what it fails to do is identify target areas where multifamily housing should be encouraged. So it only provides one side of the coin, not the flip. Any thoughts? Did I fail to?
His discussion, and this is something we've discussed as the board has discussed, relating to the comprehensive plan and particularly the zoning code in terms of what would, to reopen numerous changes in the zoning code. There are various zones within the village that would be affected by the proposal that he has, some of which would just eliminate the need to having to go back to the zoning board of appeals for variances if you just basically change the lot sizes. And just essentially to make it easier for people to live with the multifamily homes or whatever kind of home they want in that particular location, you know, in various areas. And that's, you know, I think one of the, you know, this board knows there are a number of projects that are being looked at, and there are a number of issues that are coming up with zoning. There are a number of referrals that are coming both from the planning board and others with regard to text amendments. It's all going to play in terms of how this comes. But I think this was a very comprehensive view by Kevin, because it does go into the various areas within the village where these changes would be most effective in terms of broadening the housing and making it making it more palatable in terms of the code we have. Lynn and I have had numerous discussions on, if you want to call it, some incongruities that may appear within our zoning code. Attached two families are permitted in some locations, but detached two families are not. Don't know why. That's what's there on certain occasions. And just, you know, and what we've had to do on occasions where people come to the zoning board is to sort of work out a workaround so that that person could get that, you know, approval. But I think that looking at this is important because, again, rather than just have to deal with zoning text amendment changes on a piecemeal basis, it would allow for a more overall review and perhaps avoid some of the issues that will otherwise keep coming up, you know, particularly in a lot of these zones that he mentions in particular. So this is, I think, a particularly important policy recommendation in Kevin's report.
And he provided a map. I don't know, I found it hard to read, but if you go online, if you view the report digitally, you can enlarge it, just a point.
The colorful version is helpful too.
Yes, I did mine in black and white when I the copy,
Yeah.
so it's really hard.
So I'll say that this is probably one of my, I don't want to say favorite recommendations, but regardless of whether you are doing affordable housing or market rate housing, the zoning, and I'm really glad that when he pointed out in one of his earlier papers, he highlighted it. I mean, we have neighborhoods in this community that have 10, 6, 8 unit buildings, and as of right, you know, there's, and the buildings are old. I mean, there's going to come a time where either, you know, someone needs to either rehab it or just it's going to be a tear down, and then as of right, the only thing that you can build is a 2-family house. That is just not feasible under no circumstances, whether it's affordable housing or market rate housing. And I think our zoning should reflect at least what we already have. I don't know what the politics or the thought process behind having existing 3, 4, 6 family units and then saying, okay, well now you're only going to do 2-family houses. I don't know what that thought process was, but it is definitely one of my biggest pet peeves, and I think that this definitely needs to be addressed because the truth is we have a lot of substandard housing, and you know, IFCA is going to do so much, and the private developer is going to have to do the other part. But if you're rehabbing a home, it's not logical for someone to take a 6-unit structure or even a 4-unit structure. If it needs to be a tear down, it needs to be a tear down, and you should be able to build that up and make those improvements as of right. You know, this is a serious recommendation, and when we start looking at the areas in our village that should be denser versus those that shouldn't, when we start looking about creating walkable communities and some of those strategies, this is right in line with that.
Yeah, I would have actually liked him to have included the parking issues in regards to that as an overlay. For what's missing for me is all the parking. So I would imagine over the years, a 3-unit became a 6-unit, and I'm not sure so legally, and then you can't really tear them down because human beings are living in them and they had no say in it, and it goes on and on and on. You know, because over the decades, it's an old neighborhood, it's an old village. It's one of the oldest in the county. But you know, I think the parking should be an overlay to this. That would make this an amazing piece, because we just had a discussion earlier in the evening about residences sitting in fire zones with, how does that happen? I have no idea how it happens, but it does. So I think an overlay with the parking on a lot of this, and he does discuss parking. I almost, I have to say that the naming of technical paper 1, 2, and 3 is already a turnoff to our citizens, but I'm just going to encourage everyone to read. Forget the word technical, because the stuff is, it's a phenomenal work that was done here. I mean, really, it's terrific. It's really terrific. And the details are amazing. I've read it like numerous times, so, different pieces of it, every time you read it, you already see something different and more interesting. So I really encourage people to look at the details. But I love this piece. I just think I know it's the next, but it's sort of like an overlay would be very interesting as we discuss, 4, 6, 8, 2, and all of that, because parking has become a real issue across every aspect of this village. Next.
Okay,
I-
so.
actually-
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
it's
thought
okay.
we were done.
No
Sorry.
problem. I agree with definitely looking at some of the zones, because we have talked about this even in one-on-one situations. And I know it's irrelevant, but I haven't seen, at least I haven't seen occasions where it's a 6-family or 3 families that tear down. I have witnessed where some of the properties or some of the stuff have been fathered in, or grandfathered in, as they call it. So it has happened, maybe not in the shape or form that they want it to be, but it has happened before. So I'm not sure if that will relate to any of that stuff. But that being said, I'm a little sort of disappointed that he does bring it up on the first portion of the report of the policy, where it says commercial tax base, but yet in here, in the comprehension plan rezoning, he's only basing on housing. And how do we increase the housing stock throughout the whole village of Austin, so to speak? It doesn't talk about any commercial implements, or how do we do this to work around a lot of this stuff. So how do we incorporate those two entities? To me, it's a little bit contradicting himself from the first statement to now. I think so. If we're going to do residential, we definitely have to have some sort of base, also commercial, to kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say even balance that, because there's no way to balance the commercial and the residential, but at least to offset some of the stuff that what we have been doing. So, and that could be part of one of the reasons why we can look at parking and how do we reduce some of the stuff and how do we increase
in
that.
previous iterations, the whole idea of what single-family homeowners pay as a percentage of taxes that creates the revenue for a lot of this was a big part of his discussion, and the lack of commercial taxpayers was a big part. Somehow in these policies, it just feels, it might be just the number of words used for housing versus commercial, because maybe you don't need a whole big paragraph about we need more businesses. I mean, maybe it's like a simple concept, so you don't need like 2 pages on it. But the idea of bringing large businesses in the first iterations was actually a bigger conversation than it sort of feels
Now,
as we read it now, because even small businesses do not cover the revenues needed in many villages and communities of our size to help underwrite the cost of all this other stuff that we're talking about. And we have a really disproportionate part of the tax base. So, we have a lot of rentals, and co-ops and condos are a different entity. And how they get taxed and how the revenues are collected. And I remember that was a big conversation. And somehow here, like, I'm just going to say, when people read it, I think they're going to feel like
it's just increasing the
it's
housing
not as
part,
heavily
yeah.
skewed anymore as it was before. But that doesn't mean he didn't bring it up. It just
No,
feels
he-
differently.
That was one of the conversations
final,
that we did in the community center. One of his last presentations, we talked about that, and
But he
he
did-
sort of
yeah.
agreed at that point. So
Well, when we started this process, we had a conversation with Kevin about what is the focus going to be, because we hired him to do a housing needs assessment. That was our original intent when we went into it. And we did talk about, well, what if you just did, and actually I had proposed, well, why don't we just do an economic development analysis focusing on a particular, like sort of the focus of downtown, which is something that we've put a lot of attention on. And that was considered. And that would have been smaller geographic, but more of the financial drivers. So I guess we're going to take this, and the fact that it does say it recommends that we revise our housing code, talking not just about the residential units, but also the village center and general business and all of those things. That's going to have to be fleshed out in the next
So-
step when we're looking at step
Well, he
number
has
one,
it
which
on
is
the
bringing
board.
somebody
Yeah, so-
on board to talk
He
about
has it
economic
on the
development.
I just want to say, like, to be,
That was
No.
number one.
Yeah.
He has a number one, then he's got 7 or 8 that goes, so it just
Mm.
feels like it's skewed. Like I said, it may just take 3 words to say, we need bigger businesses, you know, and the reason for that. So, but it does feel like, because we've seen other drafts.
No,
it's-
and again,
it sort of
it's
feels
just-
a little skewed, but
And I
think
agree.
just
Again,
got it.
it's just when you read this, it concentrates when it says you have to change the comprehensive plan and rezone in this, and it just talks about residential and the housing part. It just doesn't feel like, we should do more, commercial light industry kind of stuff that I think is essential for us to have at some point again. But,
well, we can add that in.
Yeah.
It's something to
I mean,
think
again,
about.
these are recommendations, and then the board itself take it
Yeah.
to the level that they wanted to do. So.
I think Quattel and Debbie might both want to weigh in on this now.
So I'd like to just add a little bit. I can understand why he put the economic development piece first, because a lot of what drives economic development is rooftops. And so it's how many housing units do you have in your community, and what is the economic makeup of those communities, of those residents, because you're going to be looking for disposable income. And income that can be used for our smaller businesses. And I think that's really important. So I see why he did that in the beginning. A fully vetted economic strategy will have a housing component to it. But I agree with the mayor when you said this was focused on housing. And so I can see why you may feel like it's skewed towards housing, because I think that was the intent of the report. But I think what he was doing is just drawing your attention to the fact that it has an economic development component to it, because it's important that you decide what you want in housing, because that's going to help us decide what type of businesses we can attract to this community.
There were different drafts, and this
Okay.
has shifted a bit from what I had seen
Okay.
not that long ago. And so my comment is more about that to Lynn than it is about whether he did the right thing or not. There seems to have somehow been a bit of a nuanced shift about the commercial aspect. Maybe.
We can also.
I don't know, yeah.
Earlier iterations.
That's
so
how
you
it
could see
feels
the
to me.
shift.
See the transition, yeah.
Actually, Debbie, you said it all. It's all about foot traffic, and you can't have foot traffic without densely populated residential. If we're talking about mixed use, particularly downtown, then you need a certain amount of people to be able to populate those businesses. If we're talking about walkable communities, you need density to reflect that. If you recall our Westchester Fairfield business conference about last year, that was a big portion of former Governor Parris's from Maryland, the idea that area, number one, it was the first place to do inclusionary zoning, but also became a place that actually built on density and creating a vibrant area that not only attracted retail areas, but eventually corporations, because you create an environment where young people and young workforce staff wants to live. So I kind of see where he's going with this, given the fact that he started off in the first portion talking about an economic development person and having an economic strategy.
We still have a couple more, but John, you've been really quiet. Did you want to chime in before we get through the end?
I guess the only thing that, the thing that strikes me really is what we're talking about now, which is really revising the comprehensive plan and really deciding, kind of planting our flag and deciding what areas we want what, and then have the zoning code reflect that. I think that we need to put all the things in place that are going to that make sense. I think some of the comments that Trustee Bazemore made with regards to these areas where it's zoned this way, and as of right you can't you can't build a building that's the same thing. It just makes, it's counterintuitive. I think that the other thing about this, and it's Kevin mentions it here, and having to look at the whole issue of higher density housing and the impact on the school system and things of that nature.
Yep.
You know, I haven't really spoken publicly about this, but you know, what's happened to the Ossining School District is not fair, and it hasn't been fair for, I don't know, 8, 9 years now. We've been underfunded. And, you know, we've tried to engage with the school board, and we've tried to talk about, you know, with them to talk about what our challenges are for economic development and what we need to do. And we understand that, you know, the increase in school population is going to put pressures on their budget, but, you know, that's not our battle to fight. You know, we need to look at 1 year, 5 year, 7, 10 years of economic development in this village. Okay, and listen, I'll fight for school taxes every day from the state because we're entitled to it and we should get it. But you know, I become concerned when we have this bumping up of these concerns here, and I cannot stress that we need to make the right decisions for economic development here in this village. And I'm not saying we're not going to communicate with the school board, but we have to do what we have to do to make this a vibrant and great place. And we cannot allow the you know, this shadow or this cloud over our head about, you know, too many kids in the school. That's a problem that New York State needs to deal with. It's a problem that Sandy Galiff and David Carlucci need to handle with. They're the ones that need to take care of this. We're here to build a better village and a place that we all can live and that our diverse population ethnically and financially can live and thrive. And that's the thing that's really important to me here. And Kevin points it out here, and it's a real thing, and it's something that's very of concern to me. But I think we need to go back to the comprehensive plan. You made some great points. You know, we did some things back. I was on the committee that, you know, was part of all that, and I didn't see it then, but I see it now. You know, I see the deficiencies. I see the things that don't reflect where we are now in terms of land use. So I'm very interested in moving forward to open up the plan and start to look at how we can, you know, create the kind of review of where we want development to happen and how we can pass and legislate code that supports that.
So sorry, Victoria, I just have to say this. And when I read that, I wasn't going to say anything because, again, it's just, I guess, you're just opening windows today for me somehow tonight. And I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said, John. And maybe, you know, 2009 to now, a lot of things have changed, and comprehensive plan was a big project within itself. And at that time, the thinking of the community and people that were involved was different. The expectations are a 10-year process or 5-year process. That being said, I wasn't going to bring up the school, but you brought it up. But regardless of how we are elected and we are elected to govern this, I think that we have to work together with the school. Because yes, you mentioned Albany, you mentioned Sandy Gallup, Senator Carlucci, but at the end of the day is, if Albany doesn't pay the amount of money that they're supposed to be giving to the schools, guess who's going to be paying for that stuff? It's our taxpayers. It's our own community itself. So if we increase, that's something that we have to be mindful at the same time. And how much do we increase our community and how much that is going to increase into our school systems? You know, because we hear that all the time. It's like, why is my taxes higher? They're not talking about real estate taxes. They're talking about school taxes. So to me, whatever happens, it has to be a mutual conversation between our school boards, our school superintendent, and how do we resolve a lot of the questions that they may have. That has to happen, regardless of
I-
how
I
we
didn't-
do this.
Just,
No,
I mean, I
even
didn't
if we
say
don't,
we
if we
shouldn't
don't,
be
if
listening to
we,
each
but
other.
that's,
I
but
didn't
that's
say
what I'm
that.
saying, is like, we have to be mindful of how do we get to the point of it will make sense for the community, not just for the board of what our vision is in 5 years, or we're gonna build 500 units. What does that mean for the schools? So, and I'm gonna leave it like that because that's a totally different topic of what we should be
Well,
concentrating
it,
tonight.
it- but, go ahead,
Uh,
Tonto.
no, actually, it might be better that you speak.
Oh,
Oh.
please, I don't think you and I are gonna say the same
Okay,
thing. Go
okay.
right ahead.
So, John, actually, if I would have high-fived you if it was appropriate, but that's probably not proper protocol on the village board. But I do think that John raises an excellent point. We're talking. It's not about our vision of the board, but it's about economic development. And I think when we start looking at what other communities are doing, not only here in Westchester, not only here throughout New York State, but all over the country. I mean, the school issue is a school issue. And every time that a building is built, there's a letter that goes out to the planning board. But at the end of the day, either we're going to do something that's going to take things in the right direction towards all the things we talk about, walkable communities and economic development and young people and senior housing and families and different stores, or we're not. Because it always seems like it's one way or the other. Either we don't build or we do build. And I think that's why we have to get that economic strategy, essentially.
Okay, so it's of course not as simple as we do build or we don't build. And yes, we are only responsible for the village municipal budget, and economic development is core to everything that we're doing. And it is absolutely true that New York State has denied millions and millions of foundation aid dollars that should be coming to Ossining. And we are a school district that is unique in the state, that we have a large and growing population while most districts are shrinking. And our population is becoming more impoverished. We are over the 50% mark for free and reduced lunch. We are at capacity in our buildings, and the school district is constantly trying to make classrooms where there previously were not. They have beautiful classrooms in a basement now in Brookside that was not previously used for classrooms. They've taken away half of the library. For a couple of years, they were teaching children on a stage. Our schools are crowded. I see it every day. My son has lunch at 10:30 in the morning because there are so many kids that have to cycle through that one cafeteria. Our school district is at capacity. And the reason why this is in the report is because he solicited input from our community. And there is a huge portion of our community that would just say, please don't ever build another residential unit in our community because our schools are at capacity. That is entirely a legitimate sentiment based on if what you are looking at is what are the conditions in the school where my children are attending and what are my taxes that are going toward the school. So I think it would be unwise from a community-minded group like ours to be dismissive of the very real concerns that are being touched on here, but are really, really central to a lot of people's concerns in our community. We are doing things like upgrading whatever it is, number 2 in here, with our focus on code enforcement, because much of the problem with our substandard housing is overcrowded housing, and often that is children who very sadly are living in unsafe conditions. And they are going to our school, and the school is absolutely going to educate every student that lives in our community. That is their job. I would also, without going into detail, I would say when the school district comes to us and says, we are expanding our classroom space because that's what we need to do so that we can adequately educate the children of our community, that this board says, we're hearing that you are spending your dollars on expanding classroom space. How can we support that effort? Because we are all one community. I do not feel that that has been the mindset before tonight, and it's certainly not what I'm hearing tonight. And I don't want to belabor this too much, but
because
I'm
you said a
very
couple
concerned.
of things. No, so if the goal is that when we're making deals, right, that we want to say, hey, developer, hey, we're going to give you this, give you that, and you build some classroom space, okay. And this is not disregarding the sentiment of this community. We know how strongly people feel about the schools, but you tell me, how are you going to do economic development without residential? How are you going to attract businesses without residential? Like,
That's not what I'm suggesting, Quantel. But if I'm going to sit here and listen to fellow colleagues on this board say, you know, good luck, schools, we're going to build because that's what we need to do for economic development, y'all figure it out because the kids will be there and we know you'll just figure it out because that's your job. That is the sentiment that I'm hearing, and that's what people at home are going to hear. And I don't think that's what we mean.
That's definitely not what I mean.
Well, I listen, he brought it up in the report, and it's a concern for me, okay? I mean, I didn't say that we shouldn't communicate with the school board, we shouldn't understand what their challenges are, what their issues are, but you know, it is this cloud that troubles me, and frankly, I'm feeling a little powerless about it, because I don't have control over the funds that fund the school. That's not my job. My job is to make this village better, and economic development is part of that. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to disregard the school system or their issues or all the things that are going on. But it's an intertwined relationship, okay, that we have with our schools and with the development of business and the development of housing and all those other things. And it's something that I'm certainly sensitive to. Maybe I'm just saying that I don't like it. I don't like that it exists there. I don't like that it sits in front of us and it never goes away, because it's been here for all the years that I've had kids in my school and I've watched what's going on. Maybe I'm just tired of it, and I wish that the state government and education would just do the right thing.
But they're
Now,
not.
but it's our problem, okay? It's become our problem, and I hate it when stuff gets passed down the line to us. This is not our problem. This is the state of New York's problem. They should fund our schools and stop fooling around.
Our community pays for that. So
Well,
when
I-
our
of course
community
we
pays
pay-
for it, it's our
I
problem,
get it, Manny,
regardless of how it
but you know
goes.
something?
It's very simple.
It's, well, no,
Well,
it's not simple.
if it is that
If
simple.
it was that simple, they'd be
No,
paying
like
the
I said,
money.
it's very simple when our
That's
taxes,
what that
or
would be
school
about.
taxes go up. That's what's
Again-
very simple.
again,
So
this
we
is what's
have to
simple.
look,
You have
how
to
do
decide
we
what you're
make
gonna
this
do.
happen?
All right.
You have to decide what you're going to do.
All right. I think I'm the one who got this a little more heated, and so I'm going to take the temperature down and say, Lynn, would you please move on to our next strategy?
Okay, so
You don't
policy
understand
strategy
now?
number 7.
We all said our piece now. Let's move on.
Well, it's
Oh,
to improve
transit.
transit access and reduce automobile dependency. So,
Transit and automobile dependency reduction.
sorry, was I not loud enough?
This is something we can do about something about, I heard.
Of what?
Mika?
It's not public.
Not
It's
yet,
not
please.
public. It's not public.
Not yet.
It's not public.
Thank you. Not till, not till next week.
Just would make it easier for the audience.
Sorry. So he discusses, at the bottom of page 18, for those of you following along, that we should consider limiting transit dependency. We have to increase transit access, encourage transit-oriented developments. And he discusses an overhaul of the overnight parking waivers. There's some intersections here, as some of the trustees had noted, with the GRWC report, that they talk about a different parking overhaul for tag parking. So in Kevin's analysis, he says that currently there's no limit on the number of stickers that go to a specific number of households within a given multifamily development. So you could have, hypothetically, a multifamily building that could be overcrowded, yet they're still eligible for an unlimited number of overnight parking waivers, which further exacerbates and encourages that overcrowding situation on our streets. And as he mentioned previously, in some of the communities, some of the neighborhoods that were developed in Ossining, since they are older, were developed pre the automobile, so there isn't area for people to even create a off-street parking spot on their lot. And then in the report, he notes that there's already limited land for development in Ossining as a general. And that in the zoning code, there's high off-street parking ratios, which then force developers to construct parking on land that otherwise could be used for housing development. He also discusses that there's a limited means of mass transit within the village. Part of that is, it forces residents to rely on private vehicles to get to the places they need to go on a daily basis. but the increased automobile dependency requires the need for more parking spaces, which then thus reduces the land that's available for housing and for commercial development. So some of his suggestions include regulating the number of on-street parking permits that are issued per housing unit, and then reducing the minimum off-street parking requirements in older single-family districts in the community, and within transit-oriented residential districts. He suggests that we think about increasing density bonuses for developers who can share parking with existing lots. And then he stresses that though it's hard and challenging, that we consider working with the county to improve the Beeline bus service within the community. So, any comments? Or nothing?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, what do you think the overcrowding ratio is in this village? You think 20% of the houses are overcrowded?
Oh, I don't know if she's.
That would be in section 1.
I mean, the truth is, there's a cause and effect, right? You give per apartments and not per people, then that's what you have. I mean, it's like you have a big suitcase, you pack a lot. You have a small suitcase, you pack less. I mean, parking's a big deal, and people should not have 30 people in a place where there should be 10 adults, right? So it's sort of a cause and effect. You get rid of some of the overcrowding, with that goes the cars. The issue of public transportation is, to me, like a separate issue. You know, we have a big commuter thing. Where was I just now? Where there was a trolley actually all summer long. Isn't that far from here? I can't even remember.
I thought it was Peekskill. Wasn't it Peekskill has one?
Yeah, somebody
Biscuit
actually has like trolleys, and I know way back a decade ago there was discussion. I'm just not optimistic about the county and the state about stuff like that. I think we sort of have to think of our own solutions, long term, not short term. There are condo and co-op complexes that have vans that take the people in. More of the transportation of that, I think, is a great idea. So, but there are two things here. There's the parking and overnight, which I think I shouldn't say I think it's broken. I think we just don't do it well. We haven't been doing it well for years. We have rules, we have policies, we have history, we have, why can't we grandfather all the people that, I mean, at some point we have to deal with the overnight parking. And the different issue of public transportation in the suburbs all over this county is an issue, in my opinion. I mean, in the wealthiest of communities and in the poorest of communities, it's an issue. So we have had ideas like trolleys. We've had ideas. I mean, I don't see all those ideas in there, and I know it was brought up in the group I went to. You know, you got a bus sitting in the community center. A third of the time, it's just sitting in the parking lot. Why don't you use that to get seniors around to places? You've got, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 senior homes. They have vans. I mean, there were all these things. But I think that's probably one of the lower hanging fruits to get going on with the public transportation. Especially with
so of course, the DWRC definitely mentioned having a trolley service. We've actually had conversations and grants about a trolley service, particularly with transit-oriented development. I do think there's an opportunity if I'm a developer and you say, hey, I don't have to do such parking requirements, and the village says, hey, it's going to be your responsibility to, number one, we're not giving you any parking tags, just in case we decide to just say, okay, there's a certain amount of people who get overnight parking tags, and we're just not going to give it to you, and you're going to be required to transport people to whether the train station or whatever the case may be. I mean, I think there's opportunities that we've seen, maybe things like that definitely across the country. We may have opportunities to work with MTA and create some type of pilot program. I think that kind of stuff has to be fleshed out, but I think in the greater scheme of things, it gives an opportunity. It's not, TOD and eliminating parking requirements and making sure that people get on the 11 bus to get to White Plains, that 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock bus, because that's where the jobs are, and being close to the train station, it's just not unheard of. If you're going in those two locations, hey, you may want to particularly live in this particular spot that has that retail spot on the bottom. So I think those things can be fleshed out in the grand scheme of things. I think when we start looking at different partners, that can happen. I will say that the overnight parking, that whole thing just has to be,
Yeah, actually,
Talk about that.
yeah.
we've circulated this draft internally among those of us at this table. Has Kevin Sylvester, has the chief seen this? Because some of these are directly related to police, and the police are, we're transitioning the overnight parking to their department. We've discussed that, and I don't know where we are in that process, but, right, because that's a, as we're updating this, he needs to, he and his department need to be part of that process.
Any other comments?
I'm just curious that Kevin didn't really speak very much to the hyperlocal transit, which is the trolley system. And I'd like to ask, when you're communicating with him, is it something he looked at in depth, or he just kind of, that's encapsulated in number 4 with working with Beeline to do something? Because Beeline's not going to do hyperlocal. They're not going to get people from, Stormytown Road to the train station or to downtown. That's
He actually has an expertise in this as a consultant, so he's been involved in projects about transportation, which might be helpful to us. We didn't hire him for that.
no, he didn't. But since he's talking about it, I'm wondering if he eliminated that for some reason, if it was something he did look at, or and if he didn't include it explicitly, what was the reason? Was there just some huge hurdle that he thought made it not feasible for us to consider? And well, I'd like to know what that is in this case.
Other comments?
Oh, one more, just one more little one.
This was gonna be a big battle, but apparently I was.
Oh, the parking thing?
Parking?
Yeah. No, we all know
Maybe
it's.
we all agree that.
It's not even an elephant in a room. We talk about it every day, parking. It's what fills our inbox, is parking.
So policy strategy number 8 was to apply a state rent stabilization law to eligible multifamily buildings. And he discusses this in detail but he caveats it as this should be the last strategy that the village considers after they've addressed all the other strategies. If those don't work, that this would come into play. He also discusses how it has some positives, but there's some negatives to it too. He addresses how it could add some level of rent stabilization, but it also has it provides protection for displacement of residents that are living only in ETPA eligible units. It doesn't address the variety of housing units within the village. It doesn't address poor building conditions for all dwelling units, not just the subset of ETPA units. It doesn't, if the village were to think about this, it needs to pay careful attention to the supply of new housing units that are coming online within the village. It also, while it provides benefits for existing tenants, it doesn't necessarily ensure fair and equitable access to new housing units. It doesn't link eligibility and economic need. Then he says in the report that if the other recommendations and strategies are ineffective, then the village should reevaluate the prudence of a rent stabilization for the village. And on the last section, which we pretty much went in order, he basically lays out the strategy, and he really links he gives essentially 7 steps, but he links 5 and 6, which is the affordable housing policy, together, and that they need to be done in lockstep with the regulatory barriers for housing and eliminating both at the same time.
See, that was what I was talking about before, Debbie, is I do think that his game plan is actually quite sequential, even though you had described that you can do. It's sort of intriguing to me. I wasn't expecting that when I first heard about it. I did think it was going to be bricks on the margin, but in fact, in the end, it wasn't, here are 8 ways of doing, that if you did, you could move this along, but actually quite sequential and interdependent. So, interesting. I mean, we may or may not agree with that, but I think that's, the question is, if you buy into his theory, into his overall approach, and he's not here, but that's how I mean, what you just said is what I had seen earlier. If you buy into that he has an expertise and we should follow that advice, if you will, then you have to sort of be careful about saying, if you agree to the premise, you really can't start at 6 or 5, you really should follow
Start with one.
that. If you disagree with that, you'd have to say, I disagree, I think that it can, and then we'd have to talk about that. I don't think it's a big discussion, but there is an overall issue here that he, at the end of all of this, and after so many studies that he's done, is really presented in a very specific and sequential order, which I think is interesting.
Any further questions, comments?
Sure there are.
Oh,
Did I miss something, Stu?
No.
each one of these is
I was surprised that this was number 8, because I got a pretty clear. I've seen Kevin present on a number of other issues. He actually lives in New York City and is very familiar with the benefits of rent stabilization. And if anything, I got the sense that he was more predisposed to being favorable to it. Even though I know we hired him to be impartial, and obviously he was, because what he said to me, and I was just looking to see if it was expressed, and I missed it, more in black and white, and I'm not seeing it now, but was that he didn't find the data to support the concern that there is displacement happening currently in Ossining. If he had found that data, he would have had this higher on the list. And that if we go through if we implement the first 7 strategies, we will even further address concerns about displacement, which would have been one of the, if we were seeing that, then this would be higher. Thank you. Where is it?
A second problem with ETPA is not the need of base affordable housing program. It's not the need, yeah. Is that the one that you were talking about?
Oh, yeah, that is not a need-based
Not a
affordable housing.
need-based.
No, I mean, that's just one of there's no means testing for the ETPA, and so you end up having people who, regardless of their income, have a rent-stabilized apartment. That's one of the drawbacks. No, but it was specifically in my verbal conversations with him was that he didn't see that the data that he had gotten from Ossining was not telling a story that people were being displaced, that they were being forced out of Ossining because there was not affordability. He just wasn't. That wasn't what the numbers were telling him, and which is one of the reasons that it's number 8 and not number 1.
What is what's sort of the next step with
What?
this?
I saw that email.
If we're posting this on Tuesday, are we asking people for feedback in a certain amount of time, for commentary in a
Question.
certain, or I mean, what are we doing now? So we have this. We want to share this with the public. All great stuff. We've given some of our opinions, questions, commentary on this, tonight. But so what now?
Debbie, you're a fresh opinion on this.
Glad you came tonight.
It's more of a question than an opinion, and what would be your expectation? If this is something that the board accepts as written, then you would be submitting it just for public information so that people can read and understand what your philosophies are, what your strategy is. Now, if you are expecting or wanting feedback on it to see if there's some changes that you want to make, then you would present it in a different light.
I don't think I'd be looking for changes to the report, because the report exists. It is now something that is a document that we need to figure out how to make use of.
Okay.
So that would be, the whole section number 3, which is actually the longest section of this report, is about the public engagement. So we have gotten in-depth, quantitative, qualitative, in-person, online, public feedback. So that said, now that we have the full report, we got the feedback when he presented 12 initial policies, which he presented in a meeting and then presented online, and then we had the online survey for it. So we do have a lot of community engagement on this already. I think the question for us now is, what are we doing with this? And the very first one on this list, really, we need to talk to you about, because it's economic development and it's talking about personnel. And are we bringing on another person? That's something that I know you have a lot of experience with, and I'd really, we need to start that conversation, and when is an appropriate time, because you haven't even started your job yet.
So when I start my job on Friday, I'll be meeting with finance and we'll be talking about budget. And I think that, you know, a lot of the things that are in here that require us to consider additional personnel, we'll have discussions with all of you on whether or not you're ready to do something like that. And also look at some job descriptions of what we would expect those people to do should we bring them on for whatever purpose is identified in here. And then we'll talk about how that fits into our budget. I think the next step for this is some of these things are ongoing, so perhaps we could not only publish this report, but on a quarterly basis, we could say what we're doing to affect a lot of these things, because you've already begun some of these processes. So we could provide some sort of feedback to the public to let them know that we are working on these things. And if they see anything that's blatantly missing, let us know. I mean, that's what I would think. But if we're going into the budgetary process, and the economic development discussion is something we'll have to do during the budgetary process.
Look like you're about to speak, Trustee Bates.
No, I think we should implement. I mean, we should move as quickly as possible
On what?
on the whole thing.
On all of them?
Yep, absolutely.
Just 1 through 8. Have it by next Friday, please.
Okay, I got a
I'll
week.
have a resolution for you on the 6th. Just
I also didn't mean to say that we've already heard from the public and we don't want to hear again, because when we put this out next week, what I'm saying is I don't think we need to recreate a new survey response.
Okay.
I do think it will be on the village website. We will push it out through social media. We'll remind people of upcoming meetings. We'll invite people to come speak during visitor recognition, and we will invite people to email us, come during office hours, and give us your reflection now that whether you're just showing up now to this conversation or you gave your input and you don't feel it's was really reflected here, or what you're thinking now. I certainly do want to hear from the public at this point and get their advice on where they think we should be prioritizing, and that's really what this is. And the conversation that we had amongst ourselves last week was, we've been soliciting input from the public through this process. The Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee was a different kind of process, but was really soliciting some guidance on what our priorities should be. And this is very specific linear steps for focused mostly on housing. But as we pointed out sometimes, but maybe not all the time, there's a lot of overlap with some of the priorities that were raised in the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee, in particular when you look at transit and parking. There were, it was very similar goals with some different strategies. And I don't think that we're doing a disservice to this report if we look at the goals and find a different pathway to achieving them. And also, we're not required to follow these. These are well-informed recommendations that we're going to take under advisement and act on as seems best.
If I just kind of piggyback in the last statement that you made in regards to the DRWC, there were some recommendations as well besides transportation and overlapping and all of this stuff. But there were suggestions of actually us, the village, partnering in with some entities. That means some hiring. So that's something that I think at some point you need to look into what this means as an overall picture. My opinion. Some of my colleagues may disagree with that. In some areas, regards to zoning, overlaying, all this stuff. But I think it's essential. Whenever we get a chance, take a look at that report that they did for us. There's some suggestions in there as well in regards to the stuff that it was done on the comprehension plan and they were not done and followed through. And if the board is going to open up the comprehension plan, that's something that we have to keep in mind. So that's something that I think some key points are essential for the board to keep in mind and to keep in task of what and how we're going to accomplish that. It's not just following this report and let's do this right now. I think it's something that is essential for how we do this.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Trustee Baseball.
would it be possible for DWRC to kind of present in the same fashion that we did today in the near future, so we can kind of go through their policies?
We had a whole community meeting in
No,
the
like
library for hours.
their posts, their actual final report.
The report was just the written version of what they presented.
Yeah, but can we kind of go through the process? So, because in depth, giving back feedback. That's something this board would be interested in.
It's not about whether I would be interested in it. It's redundant. They've already done it.
they've given a detailed, what was it, 2 hours, 3
It
hours?
was actually quite a beautiful presentation.
It was a great presentation. I want to hire whoever put it together with the PowerPoints. It was fabulous. It's just that I just
We
don't
hired
know what we would.
We did
Yeah, barely. It was a bargain.
Paid that person.
It was mostly volunteer
I know.
labor.
Honest to God, that was like a. We
But I
should be
think
so
what, I
lucky
think
that
what,
we
Quin-
can get
yeah, I
somebody.
think what Quintel is referring to, because we did have an additional information that was not part of the report. I think
A
probably
couple
that's what you're
points they
referring
said
to
they
that.
left off.
Yeah, what
And to sort of give like a timeline of how we're gonna sort of implement, or if we're gonna implement.
Why don't we let Debbie
Definitely.
take a look at it, and Debbie might want to also meet with and have conversations
why
with
don't you
these
let them
folks that
decide?
she's,
Have
up to
two
this point only
chairs,
seen
right?
on YouTube.
So
Yes, yes.
they have like a two
Two
co-chairs, maybe.
Yes.
They can also listen to this, but maybe once they see this, when it comes out Tuesday, maybe they have an idea of
Right.
something that they want to do.
All right. Where are we? Thank you. Thank you very much, Lynn.
Lynn, really terrific. I mean, I don't know if we said it. Maybe we did, maybe I'm tired, but this is, I'm so supportive of the work that's been done. Just the way it's been done, nothing's ever perfect. I'm sure there will be people that will add to that, but honestly, really great job, and thanks for, sort of moving it along and making sure we stay on track in this and basically on budget. I think it's a terrific work by Dwarka, but also by our old folks who participate in this in a very big way. So I just want to, before you leave, to say that publicly.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Stuart.
Welcome.
I know
Thank you.
you've worked closely with
He's a
Lynn on
village
this as well.
employee. Love him.
Yes, we're so lucky. And now it's the Stuart Kahan show for the next couple of topics, and you're going to make me do yard work.
It's wonderful to be getting into the weeds since I'm now talking about brush, grass, and weeds. This came about, really, I've had some discussions with Mike Duffy. One of the issues that has been happening is that DPW in the past has, trimmed a lot of brush, grass, weeds that are adjacent to people's properties. I've discussed with Mike Duffy, and Mike has indicated that it's a great deal of work for the DPW to do. And I looked at Chapter 88, which deals with who's responsible essentially for the area outside the property line but up to the curb. Unlike a lot of other municipalities, in Ossining, the way the code is written is the person is responsible essentially for their land. Doesn't say anywhere beyond that. But other jurisdictions in Westchester, New Rochelle, Rybrook, City of Rye, Larchmont, even Briarcliff, provide that the maintenance extends to the curb line, and if there's no sidewalk, it actually extends into the roadway, so that they're responsible for cleaning, keeping the grass clean, mowing, and maintenance. Now, we do require that sidewalks be kept by the property owner, adjacent property owner, be kept clean and free of nuisances. But that's not really defined, so that could be literally anything and anybody.
Could be on my
You think
overgrown
about it.
hosta, is what you're suggesting?
Could be a lot of different things. So one of the thoughts here was to a possible revision to Chapter 88, which would extend the owner's responsibility, similar, as I said, to New Rochelle. For example, in New Rochelle, the owner's responsibility extends beyond the owner's land to property along the sidewalk, street, or alley adjacent to the same, between property line and the curb, or the middle of the alley or the edge of the street pavement if there is no curb. Effectively, what that would mean is that if there are areas beyond the property line but up to the curb line, that property owner would be responsible for keeping the area clear. As you know, we have a requirement in the village that you can't allow the grass to grow essentially more than 12 inches in height. And what has often happened, and it's particularly become a problem on Highland Avenue, is that you have a lot of properties where it is off the property line and it's basically overgrown, so people can't even make it down some of the sidewalks there.
Spring
What this-
Street too.
What?
Spring Street,
Spring Street as well.
and it's State Street.
So, that's it, we can,
Okay, we get it. It's an issue.
okay. So what this would do is essentially extend the owner's responsibility. Consistent with, as I said, at least 7 other municipalities in Westchester, and many of them right in this area. I'll give you Tarrytown is the easiest. The owner shall keep the adjacent sidewalk between the curb and property line free from brush, grass, weeds, et cetera, et cetera. So that's basically what it is. It just gives you, goes, slightly beyond. Remember, the property owner is supposed to keep their sidewalk clear of snow and ice. So effectively, what you're saying is that you also got to keep the brush clear, and you got to keep the grass mowed, and you got to just have to do that. That would put the onus on the property owner where it does not exist now. I just should point that out. The way our code is written now, and this came up recently because there was a property owner, and I apologize, I forget the street, and the building department was going to issue an OTR because there was brush overgrown, not within his property line, but on the other side of the curb, on the other side, excuse me, of the sidewalk before the curb. And the decision was made that we could not issue an OTR because it's not within his property line because we had the survey. And it's sort of no man's land. I mean, the DPW could do it if they had the manpower and the ability to do it, but this would just extend that responsibility to those property owners. And again, it does extend a responsibility, which effectively is there for other things. As I said, snow and ice, nuisances, other things like that that are on the sidewalk. But this would just make a requirement that in terms of brush, grass, and weeds, they keep that area clean. That property owner has to keep that.
And that's
area.
commercial and residential?
That would be for commercial and residential. That would be correct.
And what happens when they don't? How do you enforce, that's?
If they do not,
Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
no.
Oh, you were gonna ask
Yeah,
that?
not-
we're all on the same page here.
If they do not, currently, with the way the code is written, if someone does not keep their own property clean, they can be sent a notice by certified mail that they essentially have 10 days to get it done. If it's not done at that point, this board can then say to the DPW, clean it, and we add that in your, whatever charge there is for that, that becomes part of his lien on part of his property taxes in the next tax bill. It's a little cumbersome because essentially this board has to give the authority to the DPW to do that. And that's the only section of the code where that appears. In most other sections, essentially the DPW can decide, we'll do it, and we simply, put it back as a charge. But that's what would happen if the person did not do it. They would be given a notice that it has to be done within 10 days. Now, it's not the OTR 30-day requirement, it's a 10-day requirement. And if they don't get it done, they can be issued an appearance ticket, and the village can, in essence, do self-help and charge the property owner for the work that was done. The charge to the property owner is consistent in every jurisdiction in Westchester. I mean, we have it in fact now ourselves, but it would just expand it to expand the property that's covered by this.
And why do village trustees have to do that request and not the management that runs the village?
That's how the code is written. The code
But-
says the Board of Trustees
But we can
I could
revise
let
that.
Quantel ask, but I'll just do it for both of us. But we can rewrite that so that since we're a village managed by management, not by the trustees, we could have
100%
that
correct.
done.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no law that we have to do it, right?
No, there's nothing under the village law. It's just that's how this code was written at
And
that time.
or fees, so there are fees, or just standard marketplace fees for what it costs to mow, whatever,
It is,
5
and
feet of curb or whatever
The
the
way
heck
it's
it
worded
is.
under the village code is it's whatever, let's say, the labor charge is plus 5%,
So you have a number, and that number just gets done. Okay.
right? And then it goes to finance, adds to the taxes, and it shows up there.
So there's no escalation, like it's the 15th time you've done it, so now you're paying more and more. No, because you're just paying for the labor involved in
No,
doing
but there,
it.
but there is, there
okay.
is a fine if you don't do it. In other words, there's going to be an appearance ticket as well. In other words, you could still end up in the town court with a violation for failing to do it, that the village has taken care of it doesn't mean that you're still absolved of having to potentially pay a fine for not clearing your property.
To make it
Okay, I would
more
actually
costly
rethink
than
that.
just the yard work itself.
Correct.
Because otherwise, they're just hiring us as their landscapers.
Right. That's right. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I would just,
No, but we have to think about this, because you're also tying up courts with people who then will be thrown out. I mean, let's think what it does.
Well, it wouldn't
Because
get
even if they hire us as their landscapers, if we're charging 10 times more than a landscaper, and we have the I mean,
But we're not
I'd rather
charging 10
have.
times more.
Oh, I'm pretty sure our fees that we're going to be charging these people is probably not so cheap
you charge the labor fee plus 5%.
that we create.
Well, it's what our hourly rate is. I mean, it's the union, it's what the, we know, we can figure the hourly rate, that's easy. I don't know what it says. Let's just-
Since this is a DPW thing, Paul, do you have any comment on this?
I don't think we need to get.
Is that what you're
we
waiting
can
for?
do
Is
it
that what you're
any
asking?
way we want, I think is the point.
You could do it any way you want. That's,
Okay. And
just
we
so you know, the actual cost of cutting and removal, plus an additional charge of 5% for the cost of inspection, shall be certified by the village clerk to the Board of Trustees. The amount certified becomes a lien upon the property. Now, that does not mean, but again, there's also a violation. So the person could show up in justice court and have to respond there at the same time.
Okay.
It so happens that Paul Fraley is here
Paul.
tonight because he just can't get enough of us. We thought we had a Wednesday off, but
Good evening.
welcome back.
Good evening.
Since we're talking about something that's so intricately involved in DPW, do you have any comments for us?
Well, we have done stuff like this in the past where we levied a fine through either damage or issues just like this. And so be it, it was not in the code. We still have done work on the parcel to that extent. I understand what he's talking about right outside the property line on the other side of the sidewalk, if you will. But when we do it, we don't just, we have not historically just recouped our levied against their taxes for that, 'cause that's typically the only way we can collect it at that point if property went to that state. We have gotten more than just the 5% markup on the labor. We put in there the administrative costs, the processing costs, and all the other ancillary costs associated with the same, including potential future costs that we'll put into the documents that end up in the court that end up being a tax lien. So we don't typically collect it for a year or 2 or 3 later, but at least we get it.
And it's becomes expensive enough that it's a discouragement for property owners to want this to be how they deal with their overgrown property.
Well, if it happens once, but I suspect if
Yeah.
you become your landscapers, it ain't a good deal. It shouldn't be a good deal.
I like that. I have no problem with that in our code. I guess my question is, who's going to be writing the summons or the OTRs? And I know we have been talking about a ticket. I'm not sure what the process is and where the stages that ticket is. So will that be incorporated with this?
This is not part of the section
It's not.
225.
Okay.
Not sanitation.
And just so you know, the 225 ticket has to be revised. And I know you haven't even seen the draft yet, so it's kind of draft. But the reason is this.
Sorry, Stuart.
No, it's
Oh,
okay.
my God.
The way the code is, the way 225 is worded, the fee schedule is sliding anywhere between, let's say, 50 and 250 for the first offense, I think 250 to 500 for the second. The difficulty is that under really how this court has interpreted the code and interpreted New York State law, the ticket has to have what the fine is. And the problem is if you have a sliding scale, you can't tell the defendant what the fine is. So we may have to revise the 225 to put in specific dollar numbers. But the ticket itself, basically we've got, but it's only going to be under 225. In response, Trustee Casada, to your question, who would write this, the anticipation is this would be pretty much a code violation. So you'd see your code enforcement
it will be the
officer
code
writing and the way it is, again, as I said, it's not technically an OTR, it's really essentially a notice, a 10-day notice to remove, but if not taken care of, it can then become an appearance ticket, and then it goes to the justice court.
Could we empower DPW or like the garbage guys if they see something to write those kind of tickets?
We could. We do that under 225 now,
Okay.
which basically gives the village manager the authority to designate virtually anyone to write a solid waste violation. So there's no reason that similarly under 88, under Section 88, that could not be as well. You could extend it to, DPW, you could extend it to supervisors or things like that. The answer is yes, it could be done that way.
Wait, so, hold on. Team Paul may have something to add to it.
I'm really messing up tonight, aren't I?
No, I wanted to concur with what he said, and it's good to make as many people active in that effort as we can. But the reason when we have the opportunity that we shy away from that, and we'll continue to do that, and bring in an actual code enforcement officer, because if there ever is a follow-up or someone wants to contest it, that's usually in the court, and I think we all prefer to have code enforcement officers in the court defending the code, not bring in a DPW worker or a sanitation foreman or the like to spend a day in court fighting a ticket, as opposed to the people who are trained to do the same in front of the eyes of the judge to it. I think it works a little better that way.
Makes sense. Thank you. This is probably a more in-depth discussion than you anticipated, Mr.
Oh,
Bernard.
no. I had pages.
Okay. So what's our next step with the
Well,
proposed
I
changes?
can, for the meeting on the 13th, at least have something for the board to look at in terms of change. And I mean, it's really more the sense of the board that, again, you're extending responsibility to the homeowner, or the property owner. I shouldn't say homeowner, because it's commercial as well as residential. But I can provide the board with a couple of iterations of changes to that section 88. And see what the board likes. I will include as well, that others could be named as the ability to issue those tickets if in fact they have to be issued. But as Paul correctly points out, just from a person testifying, it's probably better to have your code enforcement officers who are simply used to doing that, and in terms of just what they observe. And that's one of the things we're still working out on 225, because a lot of those would be viewed by DPW, so we have to get in touch with the code enforcement officers. But I can have something for the board to look at on the 13th, so that it can be discussed at that point.
Great.
Okay?
I'm going to reiterate that all of this legal stuff is wonderful, and for the people that watch this, all great. People need to be notified, like people who just don't know. I mean, look, I just had a conversation with my neighbor who thinks that because we have a right to 18 inches into his property, it's our property, so we should be cutting some tree down that's on the curb. I'm like, it's exactly the opposite. You're supposed to do that. It's like, people don't know that the guy's lived here for 30 years. People don't know. They get angry. We get a lot of people angry over stuff that we should just be notifying somehow, and even if it's written in that annual thing we send out, and I don't even know if it is, but somehow through either your note in a very positive way, say, look, this has been the case, this is what we're doing, attend to it. I mean,
Oh, agreed, particularly because this
before
will
we
be a
start
change.
all the other stuff, and just as far as code enforcement, while I agree with you about, who goes into court, we keep talking about using code enforcement for bigger issues. Every time we take them off the big picture to do stuff like this, I'm just concerned. So you guys have to come up with a recommendation that is a balance, not about a legal issue for me. It's a balance of financials, human assets, and how it's distributed, who does what with whom, and an 80-20 rule. So if a bunch of things get thrown out of court because you didn't have a code enforcer, if 80% still gets through, I'm okay with that, actually. But you guys have to sort of, and I say you guys because you're sitting next to each other, you got to come up with something that's human. And, you'll be living here soon. We all live here, and how would you feel if somebody all of a sudden gives you a ticket? So, I want the human aspect to go in, and the trade-off with how we use code enforcement. What's our priorities?
Understood.
I know.
Right.
I know you understand.
Yes, and I think most people would agree that the priority for code enforcement is the health, life, safety issues. But like you said, we do all live here, so the quality of life issues, it's important to address, and it seems like in most cases, if we had this on the book, things would be addressed without a ton of man hours. But right now, we don't even have the power to compel people to do anything. So I'll look forward to seeing the next iteration of this on the 13th. And we are transitioning now to propose changes to Chapter 178, noise.
Right, and folks, this is resulted from a telephone call that I received from an engineering company that has been contracted with Scarborough Manor to install 2 large generators, which they would use in the event of blackouts, and they would be placed outside the building. So if there's a loss of power, they would use these generators. The reason they called is on occasion, and the frequency is unclear because it really will depend on the building, those generators will have to be tested. The generators will generate from a distance of about 23 feet, 75 decibels. The testing can be as frequently as daily for a half hour each day, or it could be monthly. It depends on, what I was told specifically, Mayor, is that it depends on who the superintendent in the building is. It could be done monthly, it could be done daily, it could be done weekly, it depends. There's no specifics, because I asked the engineer that question today. But the important thing is that when the generators go, they will have a sound of approximately 75 decibels, each one. And together, probably about 76 decibels. The question that the engineering company raised is that under our code, there's no specific provision that relates to generators or devices. We do have things which deal with sort of equipment, but they deal more with hand tools and things like that. And so their concern is that if they test this equipment, they will be in violation.
They'll also be annoying people.
That's
why we have these codes every day.
Well,
It's got to be a best practice for this equipment.
Okay, well, again, and I specifically asked that question, and they said some people do it daily. I got the impression that that's, no, of the buildings that have, I'm not.
I don't mean to attack you, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's just the first we're hearing of it, it sounds crazy, sorry.
My wife and I test our generators every hour on the day.
I mean, it's not like it's an arbitrary thing. It's like you set up a test because it's going to annoy their own people.
Well, that's the whole point, because it's going to be placed, I mean, it's, 23 feet is going to essentially, and it's going to, that's where the sound is.
I think there's a restaurant right down the hill from
Right,
them.
I suspect they're looking at more likely monthly. And the question is, would they do half hour for each, 1 hour for each? Their big concern is that they don't want to get hit with violations if in fact they have to turn this thing on and test it. And as I said, the way our code is written, we do have essentially a carve out for what is called domestic tools and equipment, which is not a term defined in the code. And the reference there is to basically sanders, hammers, lawn, garden tools, but no specifics as to generators. New Rochelle, which tonight seems to be the go-to municipality, has actually an ordinance with this and provides that if it's being tested, it can't go above 70 decibels. But if it's obviously being used in an emergency, the code provision doesn't apply, because if you need it, you need it. Simple as that. Bless you. So, there's a couple of ways to look at this. One is they were essentially looking, could I give them an interpretation of the code, which is really, bless you, not something, that we would do. And, the noise ordinance violations are generally written by the police. Or we could simply expand the definition, of domestic tools and equipment to include generators. I should point out that under our section for domestic tools and equipment, during certain hours, there is no decibel limit. The only decibel limit is 45, and that's, off hours, essentially at night. So if they were to come under that section, they could be at 75 decibels. It wouldn't matter, as long as they're not doing it, nighttime or on the weekends. So again, this was as a request, and I discussed this with Joe Augustinelli, who said his view is that these sections don't apply to generators. Again, there's no specific reference to generators. And that, it could obviously potentially be a violation. So I raised this to the board because, again, it was something that was asked by, someone who is planning to do, work at Scarborough Manor. They've actually started the engineering work for the 2 generators, which will be outside the facility. I think currently they're actually inside the
I was
facility.
going to say that I actually lived there at one point, and they had generators then.
Right.
So all of a sudden they're on the outside versus the
Right.
inside. So it's actually, they're bigger now than they used to be built.
So-
One would think it would be exactly the opposite in this day and age, that you go smaller, not bigger. But so I guess they got a permit to build it outside.
I don't think they've gone to the I don't think they've gone to the but they're in the early engineering stages. They haven't even gotten, as far as I know, they have not filed for a permit yet
Oh.
because it would most likely require planning board approval for whatever they need to.
Trustee Codman, did you have a comment?
Yeah, can't they just build a quieter generator?
What I have been told, and both by this individual, is that that's actually the quietest that they got. Is really, for this particular type of machine that they are contracting for, that's basically the lowest decibel limit, the lowest amount of decibels that you're going to get. The way they do the testing is they're not considering sort of the, what they're going to build around it to sort of dampen the sound. But effectively, they're saying it would be about 75, 76 at its max. And there aren't ones that come in at lower decibel numbers, because that was something they looked into.
Well, there must be some remediation they can do to make it quieter, right?
So they put
There's
trees
a-
around it.
Well, there's sound deafening
Sure.
cables that you can put around the enclosure that will deafen the sound.
Yeah, and they put trees, literally. You put trees and bushes, and it holds it in.
Right.
Right.
There's actual
That's what they do
panels.
to condenser units and ACs.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So questions for us is what?
Change the law.
You want us to change the
seven.
law?
To add.
You want us to
I'm
write a note and say don't
Text-
do more
text
than once a
change.
day?
We have to legislate a new item onto the list of
Well,
machinery, is that?
let me say this. If the view is that equipment can be considered, that a generator can be considered equipment, then, then there'd be no ticket issued, because it just falls within that. I'm not a fan necessarily, and that's why I'm presenting it to you. I'm not a fan of essentially putting in a specific word into this to just say the word generator.
Right,
so
because
that
next
it's-
year will
it's
be
there.
some other thing.
That's right.
And every time we have to redo this.
The fact of the matter is that if someone were to call and say that this is in violation, I mean, I think there's an argument certainly to be made that under domestic tools and equipment, which is again not a defined term in the code, equipment can be a lot of different things. Doesn't just have to be, a sander or a type of hand tool. It could be other things. Could be a generator.
Define that.
Well, we could also define the term.
Yeah, I'm
you
just,
know.
maybe we just define the term and that,
We could do it that way. But again, I wanted to bring this before you folks, because what the process is with this company is they're now actually starting the process. If we tell them that you're gonna get violated each time this goes on, they're probably not gonna, I don't know if
How long are
Scarborough
they
Manor will do-
testing it for? Do they know?
the total would be an hour, most likely it's a
How
half.
many days?
Can we legislate that?
Right now,
And let's just
my
say
expectation is they're probably looking at doing it once a month. They said it could
For
be
how
less,
long?
what?
For how long? For a year?
They're gonna be testing it for the life of the generators.
Oh my God, who does that? Okay.
Well, it is
I guess
normal
they
that you
have to.
test your generators once a month, just to make sure that, sometimes you have to test them without load and sometimes you test them with load. But I would think that we could maybe work with them to see if they can deaden that sound so that it's not radiating that level of noise into the neighborhood.
well, if you tell them what level it is, then it's up to them to figure out a solution to bring it to that level.
Do that also. I mean, I have their decibel reading, so I could find that out from them, and then we can perhaps work something
Doesn't
out.
Phelps Hospital have the same issue, and I guess they don't have that many neighbors, the way, this place has neighbors literally
Correct.
living right there.
Correct.
Keeney's Cove probably will get that sound, 25 yards.
What would we do for an air handler on a new big building?
I don't know, because, well, there is,
Does it
air
generate-
handling equipment is specifically dealt with in the code.
Okay.
And that's, no person shall operate or permit to be operated an air conditioning or air handling device within a residential district that produces sound level greater than 55 decibels.
Yeah, see,
So-
and this is pretty much equivalent to an air handler.
So that's what our code is at this point. I mean, I'll be happy to speak to these folks to see if there's ways, what they can do about dampening it, but, I may come back to you folks, in September to see if there's something that we have to do to just refine the code with regard to this section.
Okay. Is there anything that I'm not aware of? Because we are 1 hour over our allotted time. And we've certainly covered a lot. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you for having me.
a couple of days before your official start date. And I'll just remind everybody that next Friday, September 8th, they can come on by and meet you in person and talk a little less formally than we did tonight, although it was certainly pretty informal at times, from 12 to 2 o'clock at First Village Coffee, and then 8 days later at the Farmers Market, September 16th. You'll be there bright and early at 8:30 and hanging out until noon. And I know you're eager to meet folks in the community and hear their priorities. And I know folks are excited to meet you and want to welcome you to the community. So I hope that folks will show up to either of those occasions. And we'll be listing them on the website too if I spoke too quickly for you. And with that, we're going to adjourn. I believe we have some advice of counsel. But we can just adjourn our meeting. And then I look forward to seeing everyone. Next week, we will be at the courthouse at 688 Spring Street for our regular meeting. This meeting, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.